March 18th, call to order at 6:32 p.m. First item up, review of the health and safety plan policy, use of town-provided vehicles, third read.
I noticed you made the amendments that we discussed.
Did I capture it?
Yeah, any
Okay.
issue from the department heads and those that would be utilizing that form with the reformatting of that page?
I haven't had a chance to circulate it through public safety, but I did what we discussed with Glenn,
Okay.
which really was the only substantive change, just to tease out the heavy equipment.
Yeah, it's all still there, so it's
Correct.
just formatted a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's the same options that were there before.
Yeah.
It would impact the fire department, but that's it.
Okay.
I believe that there was just one text change up in section 8,
Yeah.
and that was to align with some of the language that was used in the police department policy.
Correct.
And I meant to suggest a section identifier.
I was just going to ask you, what number are we looking at now?
So
I was going to pull up the actual
trying to
town
create some
website
space.
with the
I
policy
think
numbers.
HSP 040 will work. So we have some capacity for the building policies, then we can move into vehicles, and then we can move into outdoor work sites such as the trenching policy that we'll do next.
Any other discussion, concerns,
None.
wish to continue it or adopt it?
I'm fine with adopting it. I have no concerns with it.
Okay,
I have no further concerns.
okay.
Make a motion to adopt town policy HSP-040, use of town-provided vehicle and equipment plan policy, effective March 18th, 2024.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Health and safety plan review, plan policy review, excavation and trenching, third read.
This one, we had a text change in section 4, subsection C, a slight revision in section 5, subsection B. And I believe
That was it. For
I
the
believe that was it.
That was it, yeah.
Did you have a number for this one?
I believe 050 will work. And Glenn was here for that conversation, and he was satisfied with those changes as well. We had no concerns.
I don't have any concerns either.
Mr. Loyne, any concerns with the amended version?
No further concerns, sir?
I'll make a motion that we approve Town of Erving policy HSP-050, excavation and trenching safety plan policy effective 3/18/24.
I will second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Review of surplus equipment request from public library, third read.
So one update that I do have is the guitar was repurposed at the school.
Okay.
So that has been completed.
Figured they might want that.
Excellent.
Did you ever get the IT information that you needed for those other items?
I got it sometime in the last week, but I did not get a chance to go through it all. If you guys are good holding one more week, just
Sure.
let me
Yep.
get a chance. I don't think there's any issues, and Brian and I discussed kind of what the disposal process should look like probably for stuff like that. But yeah, I'll just give me a minute to go through it, and we'll be
sounds
ready
good.
for the next meeting. So we'll carry that.
No problem. In the meantime, we're going to get the equipment to town hall. Just so
The
it's
the
not
IT
library.
equipment?
Right.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
perfect. Review of surplus equipment request, recreation, second read?
Correct. Both of these are in reference to Veterans Memorial Field.
I don't know if they're familiar because I read them tonight, because I
was
tried
gonna
to
say,
listen
I
to part of
thought
the
you had-
meeting, or
I thought
if
you had
it
read them
was-
one other time.
So did I. But maybe we just talked about them when we talked about rec, and so it sounds familiar because we were
You know
talking
what?
about
He
the
brought it
fence
up
and we
during
were
the budget.
talking about the dugouts and
They
so.
need to, yeah.
He brought it up during
So
the
it's just
budget.
from fresh.
Yeah.
Any concerns or questions further?
I have none.
I think what I recall on the fence was it's gonna be scrapped from metal, but it's not reusable, right? Recycle it, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's two of them, back to back. I did have a question on the second one, and I didn't think of it until after the last meeting. When it's referring to the fence, do you know if they're referring to the backstop, or is there an additional fence somewhere that I'm not thinking of?
Let me double check if I'm remembering correctly. Those are wooden structures with a fence face to them, but I don't think that that's what they're referring to as the fence. So let me double check with them if they're actually referring to the backstop.
Yeah, because that's the
Yes.
only fence that I can think of that runs, it's a backstop and 4-foot fencing that runs from edge of dugout to edge of dugout.
Right.
Other than that, there's just a removable fence that you would put in the outfield. I can't
Right,
imagine they want to throw that away. That's
Yeah.
usable anywhere.
I'll get that clarification for you.
That's the only question I had.
Good for clarification, my understanding was that it was that section from dugout to dugout, including the
That's what I
back.
thought, but I just wanted to make sure before
Okay.
we say yes, and then they tear out something else that I'm not even aware of.
Right.
And also, my question would be, did they already remove the fencing all the way in the back next to the tree line, or is that still up? And if so, is that section of fence in the old abandoned, you know what I'm talking about? It's
I'm trying
all
to
the way in the
picture
rear
it.
of the property. It hasn't been used in decades.
Where they park
Like,
cars.
Kind of between like
Out-
directly from the roadway, straight back,
Straight
but kind of
back
off
from
to
the
the
road,
right a little.
off to the right, set back in the corner. There used to be a baseball field out there. It got abandoned decades ago, and it never got used.
I'll ask.
And there's a
Yep.
dugout, there's a fencing, not
If we're doing the
dugout, but-
cleanup, then let's.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to know if that's inclusive of that as well. They're going to clean the entire property.
Of course. Yep, I'll get that for you.
And
And I'm hoping their answer is yes.
Good question.
the only question, I brought it up last week, is there any comments from the fire chief about using the dugouts as training?
I'll follow up on the fire chief with that. My apologies.
Confirming he's willing. It
Well,
says it's
or-
in there.
or
I
able.
saw.
Yeah, there's a note
Or
in
able.
there.
Yeah, maybe Abel's the kind
Yeah.
of
There was some
Can.
initial conversations exploring that option, but I don't know what was determined to be the final outcome.
Okay.
So,
just to know what we're doing.
exactly.
Okay.
I'll follow up with the chief.
I'll jump down to review meeting minutes. I think you mentioned March 13th. You haven't had a chance. I haven't had a chance.
I have not.
So we'll pass over the 13th and come back to those. February 12th, 2024 minutes.
No
Any
concerns.
discussion?
No concerns, no?
Motion to approve minutes from Monday, February 12th, 2024 as written.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Review the draft landscaping services, invitation for bid.
So I did have a couple of questions with this. In your narrative, you had mentioned reaching out to the tech school
Correct.
and, potentially securing either somebody through a cooperative
Right.
or in lieu of that, maybe hiring part-time seasonal help.
Correct.
For just the mowing portion of what used to be the full IFB,
Right.
which is now pared down to reflect that we wouldn't be doing that. a couple of questions are, the line item that used to absorb what was historically the entire contract. Is there capacity in there for a seasonal help? Assuming that you're going to have a reduction in the amount of services that somebody is bidding on.
Right.
However, there's a caveat in that is, do we know if the current bidder is bidding again? Because I know if it opens up into a much larger competitive bidding, I don't know if we're going to see the same numbers. And are we prepared to absorb those type of costs? Our
Excellent
current
questions.
vendor has treated us fantastic, puts in phenomenal bids, and I think is well respected in the community, and others, they know it's been such a long-standing contract that if he's interested in bidding again, they've all basically said, it's yours until you don't want it. When you've been doing it that long, we're not going to bid against you, which is fine, and that's great.
But
What-
we also suspect it's because they don't want to bid at that level. So it will cost us more, potentially.
Correct,
If
because they know that
he
they
no
can't
long-
beat that
They no
level.
longer do it. Right, that's not only as a respect, but also
Yeah.
just a cost point.
So I'm just not sure if there's been any, sort of update on that.
Yep.
And what would happen if we were unable to secure either of those? No part-time summer help, no seasonal help, and
All
no
fair
tech
questions.
school.
Fair questions. So the existing contract goes through June 30, so we're at least covered until the start of the summer.
Yep.
This will be taking place for July 1, and if successful, the next 3 years. The proposal would look for this year to pick up July 1, maybe start in June with some training if we were able to secure one of those options. Tentatively, just to move money in the budget to start this discussion, in the building and grounds budget presentation, there was a new line item created for temp wages,
That's right.
and that was anticipating this potential change. At the time, we decreased ground maintenance services within town buildings. So we moved, I think it's $17,000 from that service contract line item up to the temp wages. The reality is that the proposal that we have in front of us is to change how we're predominantly handling parks.
Right.
So we could either move an equivalent amount from the park maintenance contract line item into town building and grounds to keep it all in that one house, or if you felt like it belonged in parks, we could create a temp wage. We can
So
structure it however
we can
you
shift
want.
it either way. So
Correct.
it's there. It's
It's
just a
there.
matter about where we end up putting it
Correct.
and what account number we assign to it.
That's exactly
Okay.
right. Correct. Now, the bigger question is, can we structure it in time? And so we've reached back out to confirm with the tech school whether or not there's viability to this option.
Yep.
They were initially indicating that it was a good idea for their students and the type of program they like the structure. So that sounded promising, but that's not a signed agreement with students in place.
Right.
So-
And the other question I have is, do those type of cooperative agreements function throughout the summer, or is it
Yes.
school year only?
They absolutely can.
Okay.
The ideal situation, if the co-op was to work, would be a two-student scenario, ideally maybe a junior and a senior. So you have somebody who's maybe more in the learning phase, or somebody else has been in the program for several years and maybe can help with some of the mentorship. Maybe has a little bit more experience already working in a site like this. The junior position would allow it to go through the summer and maybe even continue into the co-oping in the fall and the spring, because they do every other week.
Right.
So there would be an opportunity potentially to go year-round.
Okay.
And if it was to just be a seasonal hire, we would look for the time period less than 19 weeks. As,
Whatever
as best you
maximizes
can
our.
maximize the summer.
Yeah.
And then our existing building and ground staff
Would pick up the
would at
difference.
least get us going in the season and help clean us up in the fall as we get ready for everything to go dormant.
Okay.
So,
All right.
And
Thank you.
yeah.
so with the additional staff, the temporary seasonal, does this impact our liability in any way, or are we covered?
In terms of staff liability, workers' compensation, things of that nature, it would absolutely put another, whether it was the co-op, whether it was a seasonal employment, it would absolutely put the potential for a person in an employee status to be injured. That is true. In terms of a contractor, they are to carry liability insurance and workers' compensation. In theory, that covers the town if anything happened on that property. So,
Will it raise
slight
it,
change.
will it cause an increase in our insurance for workers' comp and other things? I guess what I'm driving
There
at.
shouldn't be anything that we experience in the first year. It's possible in subsequent years that you'll see a change on the workers' comp. They re-audit our levels of employment every year. So that informs the next year's employment category.
I did have one other comment on, if you scroll down to the IFB page 6, it's the last of the, under the table of June 2025. It's the narrative part talking about any equipment brought into the cemetery. I would recommend that we use either cemetery sexton or cemetery commission, now that we have a fully functioning commission that's overseeing cemeteries. It's not the highway superintendent, although it happens to be the same person.
Yep.
It may not be
It's
in the
the
future.
sexton or the commission, but not,
It-
yeah,
it's not-
specifically
yeah.
that, yeah.
So in the
that's a good
future, if
point.
that ever gets separated into two
catch.
different duties,
Yep. That makes perfect sense. And we specifically.
and there's a couple of, there's a
A few references
few
to it.
references within that, so just,
Yep, I'll go
But-
through that.
But highway super would be true for most of the IFB, just not the
Correct.
cemetery sections,
Correct.
right? Yeah, okay.
yeah. it's-
And we, to that point, in the next section right under there, we did add a little more of a specificity when it comes to the care and condition of how we expect the stones to be left at the end of every mowing. Not that that was a chronic issue, but we've had some concerns expressed to us where maybe that level of detail wasn't being paid attention to. And our cemetery section has followed up on every one of those complaints, but we want to be explicit about it in the IFB to anybody who's interested in being part of the procurement.
Right,
Okay.
thank you. I think that is all I have. Oh. It's down into the weeds of it, but
No pun intended.
no pun intended. The award of contract. Now, we have only had one person ever putting in a bid for a number of years.
That is
But
true.
under section A, award of contract, subsection D, it talks about if there's more than two bidders with identical bids, which all of these, I mean, the likelihood is so,
Small.
so small, it's almost meaningless. However, as a mathematical sort of thing, the way it's written, alphabetically, you might want to change your name of your company to start with Z so that you have the best odds, because A flips a coin against B, flips a coin against C, the winner flips it. So Z only has to win one coin of a flip, A has to win as many as there are. It just doesn't make sense. It could be as simple as if they're all identical and they all don't meet the threshold of A, B, or C, all names go into a hat and they get drawn. Everybody has the same probability of having their name drawn and they get the award. I
Is
mean,
that how you
again,
like
that would be my suggestion.
Okay.
It's such a minuscule thing, and the likelihood that you're going to be down to the penny with the exact same parameters
Right,
For more than two?
for more than two.
right.
But I just wanted to clean it up anyways.
That makes sense.
Murphy's Law says if we don't adjust it,
Right, this will be the year.
it will be the year that it happens. And somebody will say, I only had to win one coin toss.
I won 3, but I lost that last one.
Correct. And
The law of averages is against you.
it is. It is. Very much so.
Leave
can
it
make
to
that
this
edit.
table to
Yeah,
think of
that's
it.
all I had.
Don't make Jay cough.
So I can make that for Monday, bring it back to you all.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Any other things? I don't have anything else.
I do like
I was thinking rock, paper, scissors, but we'd get stuck at 3.
cage match.
Right.
No, I like the concept of providing summer work for our area youth and giving them tangible experience in their chosen trades.
Yeah, they currently have a system for agricultural. I know a couple of the students from Erving that were in that were doing lawn mowing and land clearing for the municipal airport
Right,
as part of their co-op
right.
through the tech school. So they have an existing program, language, documentation. It should not be that difficult to see if it can transcend beyond that one location.
They've tried for probably 2+ years to see if we can strike a program between the town and the tech school, so this may be
Oh,
our opportunity to try.
Nice.
all right. Review and update electric vehicle charging rates. There wasn't anything else, right? I didn't.
No,
Okay.
I'm good for now, thank you.
I only had one question. Is the 10 cents administrative fee sufficient? Does it cover currently? And I asked that because your recommendation is to lower the rate, and the language in the narrative says a rate of at least 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and you'd like to reduce it to at least 44 cents per kilowatt hour. Clearly, we're going to have to come up with a number, but I don't want to set it so low that there's not enough to actually cover administrative costs.
So, Chairman and I were having this
I was gonna
conversation.
say.
I think the issue the quick answer is not yet. So the stations come with a cloud software that helps manage them. There's with the purchase of the unit, there's a 3-year, I believe, period of time that the license is included. After that, you pick that up. And so there is an ongoing maintenance cost. Then if you need to replace any of these units or conduct repair on them, they would have maintenance. To date, we've had no repair, no replacement needs. They function since installation. So are we covering those anticipated costs yet? No. But there is a economy of scale. So right now, we're not attracting enough usage, and the higher the rate is, the more
We would
discouraged somebody
attract
would be from
less
using.
usage.
We are attracting less usage. It's extremely high for anywhere, especially for the slowest
Really?
chargers out there.
Right.
So
Oh, yeah. It's
based on-
20-something cents in Greenfield,
Oh. And yeah,
which isn't
that's-
even the supply rate, or is
Or
barely
just
the
barely
supply
supply
rate.
rate.
You know, delivery rate.
So
sorry.
some
So
places must be underwriting that cost. That must be a strategic
I gotta
decision
think
for them.
so. Or they have some other kind of supply agreement, some other kind of agreement. But I mean, I had asked before about EV rate specific. You know, is there
Right, I
something
remember you
there?
asking about that.
And those chargers aren't, the chargers that I looked at in the area, that some of them are 23, 28 cents. Some are in the 40s or 30s, 40s is pretty high. All of them are basic chargers, so they're not like it's a level 3 charger where they're getting an economy because it's a whole different electrical hookup and volume of electricity that they're going to use, right?
Okay.
Because they can use so much more per, I mean, those fast chargers are 25 to 100 times more per hour that they can consume. So, I mean, as now an EV user, my thought when I read this was just, I don't think we're going to capture the administrative costs. So having them, the overhead of having them and just having a license to have them, or the software required to manage
It's
them.
just an operating cost
It,
for,
it
to the
may
town.
need to be an operating cost.
Okay.
Unless we ever get enough volume to offset it, but I don't think if we factor in the administrative fee, I think the only one paying it is going to be our fleet of EVs, which is just a moot point,
Yeah.
because you end up doing the same exact thing.
So to that point then, if the idea is to offer the service, because we are a green community and we want to offer these services, we want to have this available to residents, non-residents, municipality vehicles, then I would say we drop it down as low as possible. If we're already knowing that we're going to have an operating line item that we are planning for, budgetary maintenance on them, then,
We're probably not today, but if we want to.
but we will at some point. So I would say leave it as low as possible so that we can attract as many users as possible. If we're not covering it anyways, it doesn't make sense to price ourselves out of people wanting to use it.
And I think about bringing people in, like having them come, park, enjoy our businesses, our facilities, et cetera. If the rate is significantly higher, you're discouraging that. I'll go to the next one.
Right.
So that doesn't help our community either. On the other hand, I wouldn't necessarily go to zero, but like find a number that just covers it in a little bit, and then hopefully that's competitive enough.
Yeah, I
If you
mean,
have-
based on the conversation, I was looking at, if our delivery rate is around 20, and we're doing 10, I mean, even if you were to up that to 35 and try and stay,
Yeah, because supply's like just under 14.
right,
So we're probably somewhere around 33 to 30, 32 to 34 cents or something, in there. So 35 just covers it in a few
it just covers
cents.
it. And we're not worried about the administrative, that just becomes a non-factor in the rate that we charge.
And unless we have a huge draw, I don't think we're ever going to see the equipment replacement kind
No.
of build up that kind of value. And to me, I would hope, knock on wood, by the time those need to be replaced, there would be incentives, and
I
we'd
was
be
gonna
looking
say there'll
at
be
faster
programs,
chargers
yeah.
because, that's where the draw is.
Yeah.
And that's where you can charge a premium. You get into the fast chargers. I mean, I'm going to assume a premium if the rates were the same. You can get up into 65 cents, and people will pay that because I will
They know they
not
can
have
be in
to
and
sit
out
there
and-
as long, and
yeah.
I can go a lot further. So
Yeah.
I just don't see the equipment side of this ever being,
Yeah.
at least not right now, being something that'll ever recoup.
I was going to say, based on the conversation, I was going to say I'd drop it down to as low as 35 cents.
All right, and I think, I'm not inclined to disagree with that, I think you answered the question, but if we drop it low and we increase the usage of, it's not going to accelerate the wear and tear on the equipment itself and cause more repair costs or a quicker replacement cost for us by providing a service.
I mean, theoretically, there's probably some number of cycles that they're designed to do or hours of charging, but for the most part, they're just passing through electricity and metering it. There's not a lot of moving parts or anything. There are some out there that actually have battery substations next to them that are allowing them to go faster off the battery, and so there's battery cycles, and those ones I'd be thinking that, but these ones, I mean, for the most part, I believe it's a pretty generic box that does some wiring and a meter. It's not anything too complicated, so I don't think it really is going to get much impact by cycles. Ideally, I think if we saw a huge uptick, then we could probably adjust it by a couple pennies to try to bring in a little more to offset that. At that
Yeah.
point, right?
Yeah, 'cause
and
we
then
don't-
maybe get to
we're-
break.
we're
I'd
not-
like to get to break even, but I don't know if we
Yeah,
will.
we're not beholden to doing this on the fiscal year, and we can do this effective tonight.
Change it as often as you want.
Right.
Yeah.
And the charging policy is a policy that you all have, so we
Correct,
can amend
yeah.
it as you see fit.
Okay.
That was the other thing I think I said to him was like, we haven't necessarily maybe tracked, or maybe we can from the software, like how much usage is not ours. And let's see what that looks like in 6 months. If we see a fair amount of not us usage, maybe that drives a decision to do
Right.
something different. If we see almost none, I don't know that changing it helps or hurts us if we're the one paying the bill anyway. So,
How many EVs do we currently have in our fleet?
one.
One?
The other vehicles that we're moving in that direction are just hybrids. So.
But I would speculate it's one of the biggest consumers right now of our EV
I was going to
chargers.
say, it would be
So-
pretty easy to track one.
Exactly. And the software is part of what that software offers, is
Okay.
doing that, so. And just for full disclosure, I'll charge at home because it's faster than all these chargers, so I'm not doing this for myself.
Well,
Was there I mean,
I haven't
like-
made a motion. If you
Yeah, I mean, if you,
I'll make a
if you
motion.
want to, I mean, I'm with you on 35 cents.
The only
I think-
question I had was, how much time do you need to adjust the actual program?
You tell me the effective date, and it can be done for that.
Yeah, I was going to say tomorrow, but
Yeah.
if you have enough time to go in and just change the software.
If you want it done for tomorrow, that's perfectly fine.
Make a motion to amend the FY '24 electric vehicle charging rate to 35 cents per kilowatt hour effective March 19th, 2024.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Joint
With that,
meeting?
it is 7:02, so we'll call the joint meeting with the Capital Planning Committee and the Finance Committee to order. Come on up and join us.
I'll be interested to see how that affects
Yeah. I'm
consumption.
just curious. There are a lot of like apps and tools out there where people rate if they worked, how much they were, availability, and there are comments about the rate. There have been for a while. So.
Charge your battery, get something to eat downtown.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So, helpful. Just on that note about the monitoring, the one thing that is hard to separate right now is the library because it's not on its own meter.
Oh,
That one unit. The other one, the bank of them and the new ones down at the PD, those are all on separate meters, but that one's not, and there is a cost if we want to break that out. It's not cheap. I don't think. It's thousands, I believe. So at some point, if we want to look into it, we can.
Yeah.
But it's harder to separate that one right now.
I think we'd have to see an uptick on all the other usage first to make it worth the
Yeah.
expense.
Monitor to monitor for that kind of money doesn't make sense to me. So
No.
No.
welcome. So we've got the operating budget, capital requests, recommendations, and the ATM warrant requests for joint review tonight. Do you want to start from the budget overall? Or somewhere different?
Hopefully the summary reminded folks where our conversation left off. So in the memorandum, I just summarized some of the conversation that happened at the last meeting, which predominantly focused on capital. And there is a new matrix table to help you all discuss your funding strategy. There was a request that was communicated up from Chief Wonka regarding the EMS contracts for next year. We've heard from both towns. We originally had requested $100,000. Based on the feedback from both towns, it looks like we need 107 to cover what those two contracts will be. So I noted that request. There was also placeholders put in the budget before for the wastewater department on our debt service schedule. So I've revised those numbers so they reflect next year's schedule, and I've shown you exactly what those changes are, so it results in a net increase of $2,136. But that's more money going towards principal rather than interest. And then I've also updated your revenue sources spreadsheet to reflect your town meeting approval at January 31st special town meeting. And based on our existing agreement with Montague, I have calculated that $242,138 will be the payment or the assessment to Montague for wastewater services. So all of that documentation should now be updated. And then with that came a first draft of the budget summary document that we've used in the past years. What's missing from the budget summary table right now is how you want to structure your capital plan. It's my understanding that you want to identify an amount of money to go into capital stabilization, and that those items that are going to come from appropriation are going to come from an appropriation out of the capital stabilization fund. So that's slightly different than what we've done in past years. So I just need to understand how you want to structure that in your budget summary.
Library construction repayment. I thought we finished up, or was this the last one?
This is your 5th payment.
This is the last one, although we talked about this, I think, in the capital, and I think we need to circle back on like what the number should be. My math would say it's probably not 273,
I thought we
but it's
offset
over
s-
200.
I thought we offset some of that by utilizing the 100,000 from lead.
The lead certification was always meant to be a separate $100,000 payment.
Yeah, in the original, it
In
was
the
a separate.
original, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
it was 5 273s and 100 for lead.
Oh, okay.
That
all
was to replenish the amount from the town.
Brian, do you have, and I'm sorry, I did not ask this earlier of you, the overlay? Do we have a balance on that?
Stand by, I can get you the June 30 balance, so it's not going to give you the current today.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I only asked because I think we talked about this last year when we were building 24, and that, depending on the ATB cases, the balance wouldn't be suffice, or may not be, depending on the decision and the final outcome. So if we get into, a give and take of a line item, that one, I think, could also be reduced.
Brian, on the benefits line, is
Yes.
that the new corrected number that the treasurer was requesting? And do we know, does that have cushion in it, or is that just bare
There's
minimum?
Almost no cushion.
Okay, so we have to figure that out too then.
Right.
And that's no cushion after the rate increase?
Right.
Yes.
Does that also include the positions that were in question that school brought up having that we weren't on the original tally from treasurer's office?
Because there was no decision from you all to say increased benefits to cover any additional positions, that is based on the initial assumption for existing positions that had been agreed to be funded in FY '24, continuing in FY '25. That doesn't
And
reflect new positions for FY '25.
And originally also some capacity, but when the rate increase came, that's gone.
That's correct.
And when the school the school committee came with their budget, they discussed at least one position that we didn't believe was in the list.
That's correct.
At least, and I think, or maybe I don't
I think
recall,
that was
but I
the
thought there was
adjustment
a
counselor.
how many and making sure that we get a final number, right?
Correct.
Of what was the delta from what was presented by the treasurer and what is actually out there being proposed.
Well, I would like clarity because they hired one person, and I believe they went out, it had 3 different titles, but because of the scarcity of finding a person, they said any of these 3 specific titles would work. And so they filled that one role.
That's correct.
But then they had come forward and they read a letter from the superintendent. So that would be person number 2. So they hired one, but then they were hiring a second.
But the hired one was already in the numbers, I believe.
Right.
But that was
but
the question.
Where were they hiring the second? Was that search ongoing right now in FY24? Or is that an FY25 position? And if it's an FY25 position, how many positions is the school actively seeking for FY25?
So are you asking to get a count, or are you asking to get a difference between what was budgeted and what they're proposing?
All of the above.
I was going to say yes.
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 Okay.
I'll get that.
Yes, because I was under the impression that the justification last time for putting this advertisement out under 3 different headings was because of the difficulty finding someone for the role. And so that they hoped this would kind of cast a broader net. And that it was one role, one individual, not several people. And somehow that seems to have morphed into several people. And if we don't have the benefit lines in there right now for them or in FY25, then something has to happen with the school where we become collaborative and talk to treasurer's office or however when hiring is happening. Because we can't just keep having hires happen that we don't have benefits for. And we've been very lucky so far that that hasn't been a problem, but with the changes and everything right now, it very well could be very quickly.
Well, and speculatively, but it sounded like people deferred benefits, whether they did that because they knew the situation this year or not, I don't know, but the messaging seemed to be they deferred them for this year, but might enroll next time.
Correct.
So, I mean, that
And prior to
doesn't-
the rate increase, I think we had placeholders for growth for 3 to 4.
on
benefit-
top of what we
on
knew
top of-
was actively.
On top of what we knew, but all of those 3 to 4 got eaten up with the rate increase.
Right.
Okay.
So, in summary, how many is the school planning between now and next fiscal year? How many of those are already in the number that we have? How many extra? Are all the other positions identified that are actively being recruited that might be benefit eligible already included? And then what does that leave, i.e. probably 0 for capacity? Because we're in that right now and said we didn't want to be in that again next year of having 0 capacity in the benefit line.
Correct. And whatever our current number is, we do have to have a cushion of, 3 or 4 policies that are available, because while it may not be a new employee, come open enrollment, somebody might change their mind and say, my situation has changed and I need to avail myself of benefits through the town. And
Or-
we have to have the capacity to be able to offer that.
Mid-year life events or,
Correct.
there's
That's
all
what,
those things. Yeah,
happen,
yeah.
mitigating circumstances, we have to have that capacity. Not just for new hires, but for current employees that are opting into the program.
Yep.
Could I just clarify for anybody that's watching and doesn't know? When we're talking about eating up, the rate increase would eat up what we had planned for cushion. And that's a rate increase from the insurance companies, not some rate increase we decided to give people. Because we have no choice on that.
Correct.
Okay. thank you.
Correct. That was basically the new assessment.
So the only other piece that is really the sort of elephant in the room that's out there is the capital, as Brian had mentioned. It's not on the,
In the tally.
say again?
In the summary sheet, in the
Yeah,
tally.
in the tally, in the
Yep,
summary sheet.
yep.
We don't have anything in there. Knowing that we have capital stabilization balance 862, so we, based on the presumption of the capital improvement breakout that Brian offered, if we were to utilize capital stabilization for everything other than IP mill, wastewater, and the 2 senior housing pieces, you're looking at 280,000.
I think it's more than that.
It's more than that.
That's not including IP. It's also taking. So the reason I say 280 is because it's taking wastewater and putting it out of retained earnings.
Yep.
That's 212,600. There's part of the care drive would come out of that as well.
So the only thing, if you have this list, if you take out 7 and 8, which are senior housing projects, The only other thing left for water, wastewater would be the fence for 63,000. So
Yeah,
that would.
63.6.
Yep. So that knocks it down to like 360.
And Ben or Capital, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I recall, so part of funding these from capital stabilization is so that when we close them out, the money goes back, whatever's left. But it wasn't meant that that's self-fundable yet.
Correct.
So there was, I think, a discussion about there should be some deposit in and then fund projects out. But we should still be building a capital stabilization because it's still not nearly, I mean.
I mean, based on those numbers, I absolutely agree. I think our deposit in should exceed what
Okay.
we're looking to take out this
Okay.
year.
So-
Gotcha.
So in order to keep building for those larger purchases that are coming in 26, 27, 28, absolutely.
The other thing I just want to point out that's not on here because we didn't actually receive a formal request, but it is something that is in the works, is the elementary school roof and HVAC and heating. We know that at least, or we suspect, that a portion of that will be coming in FY25. That is still very much in the very beginning stages of work, so we don't even have numbers or anything like that for that. When capital had met before, the plan was whatever was available for free cash would be the ask to be put into the capital stabilization account at a bare minimum. And if there was any way to eke out some raise and appropriate, that too, because that was completely taken out last year.
But circling back, just to be clear, so 360, did we agree on 360?
Yep.
That was not enterprise and not funded from grants, funded in other ways.
Brian, what am I missing on your
I'm trying to
breakout?
understand what I'm missing too.
What do you mean? 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, and 1 of FY20, next row.
Do you have the security upgrades for the PD for 130?
24.
For 160?
It's all part of this budget planning process.
Oh, yeah, but that's not going to be in your FY25 table. If that's the difference, then that's why you're not seeing it.
But it is a capital expenditure, and we were just tallying capital expenditures.
Totally. For FY24, absolutely.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I don't think Scott specified FY25 specifically.
Well, yeah, I was looking in our budget, it's FY25
Only
capital.
25?
25,
Okay, well, in terms of what we got to come up with and it's going to come out of there, that's in there too.
okay.
Because we're talking about funding it now, so.
But is that the difference that everybody's talking
It's got to be.
230
that
to
would,
360?
That would put it at 310. No, that would put it at, that'd put it at 4. That'd put it at 410.
Well, I got 360.
Deducting the fence, if we start with our original number of $423,600 and you take out the wastewater fence, that knocks it down to 360.
Does everybody have the table I provided them?
Yeah, because the total at the bottom of the table says without IP and senior housing, 423,
No, but
600.
next page below that. That's the table I'm talking about. We're trying to reconcile the narrative from above to that table, and it's not reconciling.
So
Oh, I wasn't looking at the
Yeah,
table. I was
that's
looking
what I'm
at
trying to reconcile.
The actual memo, what we were recommending.
but right.
Correct.
So I followed the memo in the grid. So request one IP mill, 4 million, 600,000.
Hang on. Just 1 second, okay? I just want to, this list is not what's in the narrative. You don't have the fire one up in the narrative.
Yes, he does. Oh, no, you're right, Kate. Okay.
He's got it down here in the table, but not up in the narrative. In terms of the requests list,
Do you guys have the wrong list?
I have the
No.
packet that we got tonight, so I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying it doesn't have everything
I
it's
think that
supposed
is
to.
something that was missing from our last one. 'cause you
This is
sent
the wrong
over.
list. That might be part of the problem. Because the
And you-
extraction
you
equipment
sent
is
the right
not on
one-
this
You brought the right
list.
one out at the meeting, so this was the wrong one
Deb
again?
had a handout at the last meeting, or we
She was
printed up
not
copies.
here, we weren't here.
Sorry,
There's a number 10. Is that what it is?
Yes,
In
yes,
50,000?
this, yes,
the
this is
extraction
not the right
equipment.
list.
Okay, thank you.
But the only difference is the extraction.
Like, we're trying to
Yes.
reconcile documents
Yes.
that don't work
And the extraction
together.
equipment is on the table.
I'm lost. What's the extraction I was missing on this one.
I think you missed both those
Yeah.
meetings.
Jaws of Life.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the 130 isn't down there because it's an FY24.
Right.
That was the
And-
money that we got back from all the unused portions figured into this too? How much would-
You're
I'm sorry?
talking about the closeout projects?
Yeah,
That's back in your stabilization plan.
so that's part of this 8. Where are we?
Yes, part of the 862.
Thought we had more
Or
than
we
that.
did that after June 30th,
That's true. 862.
so it's not on there.
No, so,
Looking at the date, as soon as I read the date, I said, it's not captured.
Which,
On the FY revenue sources, our balance, that was as of June 30th and 23, but we just closed out a whole bunch of,
but something like
special.
close to 300,000, wasn't it?
Stand by. We moved 390,000.
Okay. On top of the 862?
I just sent the Board of Selectmen and the Capital Planning Committee the corrected list.
thank you.
I hope. Yes.
So the available revenue coming out of capital stabilization as of the last special town meeting should be 1.252,896.
That's what
Correct?
I'm getting, yeah.
And there it is. So everything, okay, so there's two changes then. It's the 45,633 for the vehicle extraction, as well as not the 130, but for
One-
FY '24, it's 165.
Correct.
And that was the 35,000 for the school portion of it, to add that on.
Yes.
oh, yeah, okay, yep. Yep.
Okay. While that FY '24 is going to be appropriated if we move forward, current fiscal year, it's part of the conversation as far as how much of that stabilization fund are we expending between now and annual town meeting, as well as at annual town meeting, but it's not part of FY '25. It's
Yeah, between now and
And-
the end of fiscal 25 planned.
correct. Yeah, so,
okay.
you know.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. So that number without IP, without wastewater, and without senior housing, are we in agreement that that is 395? I'm sorry, with the fire, it's 445? Is that right?
What are you taking out of that?
IP, senior housing, wastewater.
I got 302.
Oh, boy.
Anybody else?
What is
Going once?
what is our starting number?
Total? Well, that's why I was asking, which way are we starting?
Yeah.
The table in the packet that says 5.791788 is just missing the 165 for the current fiscal year for security. correct? Everything else is on that list.
No. It's missing the extraction, the one that was in our packet.
No,
In the
the-
Oh, on the
table.
list.
I'm sorry, in the table, not up above. Is that what you're trying to ask? What's the total that we're backing down to?
Space and recreation. Truck.
I need Excel.
Plus that would be 11, okay.
What about the, well, we're not including the 130 for the security upgrades?
It's 165 now.
Security, yeah, the security upgrades are 165.
Basically, if you have the newer one, I think it's disregard the one in the packet tonight, right?
Yes,
Because that is incorrect.
yes.
So it's the additional 165?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That was my difference, I'm sure.
And 45, 633 versus 50. For the extraction, are we using 50,000 or 45, 633?
I was using 50.
I like nice round numbers, I'd
Yeah.
use 50.
That's fine, I just want to make sure the numbers,
Yeah.
get them to tie.
I feel like we're playing cards and I want everybody just to put their number down at the same time.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah,
I'm staying where I was, 445.
What did you say?
445?
That's what I get.
445.
Yep.
Okay.
okay.
So
Scott does
Did you
not
get a different
agree.
number?
Going off of your memo, yes.
If you look at Brian's chart, you have to add in the 165.
I
Yeah.
think he's in your memo.
Okay.
I mean, your memo.
Yep.
We'll get number 2,
Yep,
number 3,
yep.
number 4,
Mhm.
number 5,
Number 5.
number 5, and then number 9, number 10, and the next one, number 1. Take the 63.6 out,
Yeah.
right? Is that what it is? That's what it was.
All right.
Comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay. So our capital spend plan is 445 plus 63.6 out of wastewater enterprise. The rest of it is debt exclusion or TBD on grants and other
Yeah.
funding sources at this time. So they're not funded yet per se, they're just anticipated and recommended to go down a path.
And I just want to clarify, because I think Scott asked the question last week of why I broke out the funding with senior housing and the IP mill. And so I just want to make sure it's clear, it's not because we don't support it at all, it's quite the opposite. There was some question, particularly with the senior housing project, as to when those funds would be needed, if they would actually be needed in FY25, if they'd be needed in FY26, and what grants. At the capital planning meeting, I believe it was the chair of the senior housing committee spoke, and he had said that they are very, very hopeful that there will be a fair amount of grant opportunities coming in for this project. So we on capital didn't really feel we had a good way to add all that in, knowing that it's a project that hopefully is going to be so heavily grant funded, and there was just too many uncertainties as to dates and timing of when funds were going to be needed and all that.
Do we want to circle back to library construction repayment for a minute?
Sure.
I have the tally, if we want to just talk through as a group, what has been paid back and how we want to handle the last payment. The bigger whole conversation, but just in terms of the number here. So, at the 2020 ATM, we put 273 back. At the 21, we did 273. Then at an STM in the spring of 22, we moved 170,933 that was left in the solar project account, was separate. We moved that to general stabilization. And this is the one that has the asterisk on it that probably needs discussion. It was the unused money for solar. The purpose of the article was just solar. My perspective was it was an additional payback. If we just closed it out, it would have went to free cash, but instead we put it in general stabilization, circumventing going to free cash and then becoming a payment, in my mind. So it was an additional 179.33 towards the payback, because had we not put it in
Correct.
general, normally it would have just been free cash.
Correct.
So that was my thought process when we did it. And then we did 273 at the 22 annual. And then at the 23 annual, reduced it to 245. It wasn't 273. I believe I made that adjustment on the floor. So all total, that was 1,234,933 paid back so far. Of the 5 payments of 273, which that totals 1.365 million.
What was that total again?
365,000. And so the difference I get is, if we all agree the 170 solar was an early payment, I have a net due of $130,067.
Yep.
To get to the 273 payments total. And the lead went in, which was a separate, and then the 544,000 payments from MBLC were all moved in along the way. So
Yeah.
I think in terms of the big chunks of payback, that's how I summed
That-
them up. So
Yeah, I got the same number, the 130.67, which would satisfy the initial
commitment.
commitment of payback.
So I guess it's just a matter of, do we all agree that that 170 for that was unused solar money was paid back towards
No.
the library loan or not?
So I served on that committee, and I know this is just going to really be splitting hairs, but we had to come and ask the residents to fund that solar separate from the project because the project was over budget. So to me, to say that money left over in that solar account is a payback for the library feels a little disingenuous. That was funding that wasn't used, that the solar project didn't need. And I understand it's a matter of it going back to this account only to be moved out to this account. But had the solar been included in the process, that would have been one thing. But the solar was a whole completely different, separate, standalone project. And it was funded completely outside of the building project because of the funding problems. And so I feel like to say that, well, just because it came in less than we expected it to, and there was some funding left over in the account, that suddenly became a payment, feels a little disingenuous to what we told residents.
So my take is, it was a separate funding source. If we just closed it out, it would have went into free cash.
I said it was splitting
Right?
hairs.
No, but I'm just asking if you agree with that. Because on the idea that it would have become free cash, and then we would use free cash to do whatever we chose to do with it. Most, if not all, most of the other payments have come from free cash
Right.
or raise and appropriate. But the differentiation was just, it was a deposit to general stabilization, which it was not a planned put more in savings. It was a put back because we had a debt
Right. The idea
to
was
ourselves. So I guess that's my question. The intent of that 170, was it to pay back more of that debt, or was it just to make a deposit in general stabilization?
So when we made that, and we'd have to go back and pull up the minutes, but when we, my recollection is when we had that discussion, it was to save ourselves the step of just letting it close out to free cash and then creating a warrant article to then take that free cash and put it back into the stabilization. It was saying, let's just move it right back into the general fund. It's the same principle. It's still now the town's money, regardless of where it came from, whether it came from raise and appropriate, whether it came from free cash. It would have become free cash, which is where we've made all of our payments from. So we were just trying to expedite that and put it in there when we talked about it. So I had the same recollection as you, as when we made that move of 179.33, I think it was with the understanding that we were utilizing that as part of the payback to the stabilization.
You want me to read the article information for that?
If you have it pulled up already.
he was
'cause I
trying to pull it
just
up, but
opened
you've already done it.
You already have it.
We wrote, the approval of this article would transfer the stated funds from the library solar array special article fund and deposit the same amount in the general stabilization fund. The installation of the solar array has been completed. The system is interconnected with the electrical grid. It's generating power. The available funds remain after the closeout of the construction and the commissioning contracts. This article is meant to replenish funds used from the general stabilization fund for the construction of the Erving Public Library.
So the voters knew when they were approving it that it was from the general stabilization for the library.
Thank you. That's where I was going to get back to, because did we talk about it in there? And
Right.
I think that's clear that that's the purpose, but at the end of the day, I guess the question is, is that how we take it, and does that mean there's 130.67 left to put back, or not, in terms of the large deposits?
My thought on that is, if what Brian just read had not been in there, then I'd agree with our chair. But with it being in there, I think it's reasonable to just transfer it, as leaving you with your 130 to transfer in.
Other opinions?
I agree.
So at 130.67, the stabilization account will, for all intents and purposes, be made whole.
Yes.
So then we would update our tally accordingly on that one?
Going to be $130,067.
67.
$67.03.
You laugh, but we've done that before.
That's why I like nice whole numbers.
I laugh because Jim would make sure we didn't lose the 3 cents if it had been there.
Okay, update has been made.
Okay. So I know we went around a little bit, so we talked about benefits. Was there anything else in the benefits section? I think the big one was just understanding what no capacity we have, what does it cover, what's still outstanding, and figuring out what that number needs to be, because likely it's not large enough for what is planned at the moment. We made adjustments on the repayment, the library.
Right.
Overlay, you asked about what the balance was, is that
Yes.
right? That's an open
The
one?
annual report that I pulled up from the fall typically had a tab, and I'm not finding it in this PDF version, so I'm gonna follow up with the accountant tomorrow and get that for you.
Thank you.
When, can you just refresh my memory, and maybe it's down there and I just didn't notice it, but when we put in our tally, 200 for the overlay, is that usually coming out of RNA? Is it its own article, or is it just coming out after the fact? Yes.
Excellent question.
Both?
It's not an article that appears on the town meeting warrant. We pull it in terms of our assessed revenues and expenses up front, and so the assessors have the ability to take the additional capacity. So basically is the held over raise and appropriation capacity that they're able to
So we're
assess
just-
to the overlay.
We're under expending our RNA
That's it.
potential by 200, and then they're taking that because that is
Correct.
within their authority? Okay, so that's usually how the transaction happens?
That's correct.
Okay. So reducing or changing that is just increasing how much of the RNA we spend,
Correct.
potentially.
That's a great way to word it, yep.
And then this tally doesn't do it, and it's maybe more of a focus this year, but the free cash is bundled all in there, and so it's a net total, but obviously if I just took 750 roughly of free cash out, I would say we're funding some of the rest of the budget out of free cash, which if it was operating, I would be concerned about. And it's just not clear because it's not allocated in buckets.
Right.
Brian, did you do real-time updates to your workbook?
I'm doing that now, yes.
All right. I was just gonna see if you had the same number that I had.
With the change after the library construction, assuming no other changes at this time, I have a balance of 468,945.
I had 946. I wonder if that's a rounding thing.
It's the 3 cents.
We just
945
That's interesting.
or
That we're,
6.
we're a dollar off. 49.97.
Brian, what's your number again? 468.
468,945.
Thank you.
Ah, that's why. Is I hit a 5 or a 4 instead of a 5.
That will do it.
That's a dollar.
Just going down the totals here, so we incorporated, general government hasn't really changed since the presentations. Public safety, you incorporated the change in the fire department assessment.
For EMS.
For
correct?
EMS?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry, EMS assessment. Ed is Ed, Public Works,
No
Yes.
changes.
and then Health and Human Services, Culture and Rec. What's the assessments? 62-1.
That used to live in general government. Well, part of it lived in general government, a little piece belonged in public works. That is the FRCOG former county assessment
Okay.
and the Franklin Solid Waste District assessment.
So those are our pseudo-county district type assessments,
Correct.
okay. And then the benefits, which we
Right.
believe is underfunded.
Yep.
And to be clear, that OPEB's not in that line item. OPEB is in the final special articles line item.
And then 857 on the wastewater is just the difference between the budget and what the estimated Montague assessment will be.
That's correct.
Right.
It's no additional, so just an operating total.
Correct.
And then the adjusted library, blank for capital because we haven't identified a deposit amount.
Correct.
Yep.
And then in other, we have 100 for OPEB.
100 for OPEB. You have 8,000 for purchasing, advertising in the around town. You have 70,000 for the assessors for
Legal.
revaluation and litigation.
Which, or is that combined?
It's both. It's
Okay.
35 into both buckets.
Got it.
30,000 for building maintenance generally throughout the town. 55,000 for the wheel loader lease, year 3, I believe.
55.
55, correct?
It's not 65? I thought the
I
lease was
No, it was
65.
4 even payments with a $1 at the end.
Okay.
Yep,
What was the buildings? Was it 30?
30.
Thought we moved that to 50 in the past years, no?
Nope.
Okay.
What you did restore in the last budget was the annual appropriation for highway maintenance. That went to 50. And you restored bridge maintenance at 5,000 a year. So those two are in there. And was there anything else?
So, the last two, highway and bridges, a total of 55?
Total of 55, correct. Just make sure I got them all.
Deb, did I hear you correctly that you were mentioning that the capital had talked about
I have 318.
I do as well.
Perfect.
all of free cash? The ask would be the
Mine too.
747,
Boston School
110
now.
would be
Yes,
the
absolutely.
deposit into capital stabilization? Okay.
Because we know there are,
Multi-million dollar projects coming up?
correct.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just want to make
Yep.
sure I heard that dollar amount was
Yep.
the one. Because I have the workbook, and so I just added in the 747, 110, if we were to put that as a placeholder for capital stabilization. It says R&A, but it could be from free cash.
Sure.
And then I added in, we used 21,000 for a placeholder, correct, for benefit? That's the max.
21 something. yeah.
21 and change, but 21's close
Yep.
to get there. And I was saying, just added in 4, just to know that we had 4 additional based on, and again, we still need the answers of, that doesn't include if we're short.
That may only be 3 or maybe.
That may only be
yeah,
3 or
right,
2
right.
based on current projections, and maybe you need to add another, 42,000 to that if you want to get back up to that. But just adding those 2 figures into it, it has us at a deficit of 362,165.
362.
362, 165, yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there as, that's the whole picture of, adding in the 4 placeholders for benefits and the capital, the transfer of free cash into capital stabilization, knowing the 5-year and 25-year plan of all of the different projects coming up where there's going to be a drawdown. And if we're spending the 445 out of our current balance, you're only going to be left with a little shy of 808,000, because we're at like 1.2.
Yep.
Without a deposit.
You're correct, before we do any
Yeah,
deposit.
okay,
Then if
yeah,
you
yeah,
if you were able to add that 747 back in, now you're a little up over 1.5, working your way towards being able to look at the multi-year plan and have the funding to at least plan for them,
Yep.
maybe. So. So, something to think about. If that's, if we're, the focus is to put the money into the stabilization to ensure we can do the long-range plan for capital, it's where do we find that roughly 360 and change? And that could be anywhere from 330 to 370, depending on when we work everything out. And I can't begin to have a guess of where to find that yet.
Well, I would say, and I brought this up at the last meeting, the school is historically almost turning back $100,000. And so if we ask them to find that within their budget, I mean, every other department, I feel like we look at and we say, over the course of, X amount of years, you have historically turned back this much money. And we have a conversation with that department head about why is that happening, were there mitigating factors within your budgets during those years? And the school committee did not express that they had mitigating factors. And it's not just 1 year, it's, 4 or 5 years that's been approximately what they've been turning back. So if we simply ask them to deduct that, they actually wouldn't, I believe, their budget comes in pretty levelly funded and they wouldn't need anything. So that would be 100 right there. And I know there was a school committee member who has expressed that he would like the school to have a cushion within their budget. But they also admit that the school committee has always worked well with all of these boards. So I kind of feel like, what do you need to build in a cushion for if you know you can come to us and we'll work with you when you need things?
I mean, I think it's a great question.
Although I believe they're meeting to finalize their budgets tomorrow night.
Nothing's final till it's funded by the voters. I mean, another place that we have, let me back up. When I look at that tally, before the things that you mentioned, if we just look at the number, we were at like 460, almost 470 now. To get back to 750, the full amount of free cash to like what are we funding from free cash, it's about, 300,000 between OPEB and the overlay alone, you'll get 300. If we took out the library payment, and said that's
Yeah.
from free cash. So just for me, we're funding operations operationally with RNA at least. It looks like we can get there. And not end up using free cash to fund operations.
Correct.
That just from my perspective when I look at it. And then, I'd say personally, can we get 700 as a deposit? Would I like 747? Sure, but could we get a decent chunk? And then that's about 300, and how do we get there? Could be 100 there, school. There could be 100 out of overlay instead of 2. I think last year we did that.
Right, we did that last year, we dropped it.
OPEB, we have skipped it before. I know we've reduced it. I don't know if we actually skipped it or if we only gone down to 100 from
I think we
300.
reduced it to
But,
1.
did we skip a year? I don't know.
Yeah,
We're-
and I apologize, I was crunching another number. When you said OPEB, embedded in that was it?
100.
It was only 100.
100.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry.
and those are just some broad stroke
Mm-hmm.
numbers that might help us get closer. I think there was a variety of other small things that were definitely increases year over year that we didn't. We didn't discuss post-presentation whether we were all in support of them or not, the increases that came out. Right, like we got the presentations from all the department heads and everything, but I don't really feel like we circled back and said, okay, yeah, we're okay with all these increases because we were trying to get to this point of where are
Correct,
we,
we have
right?
not.
So,
I mean,
how do we approach this? Do we want to go back through that and have that, department by department down through? Like, are we good with these and finding them, or we want to challenge that that's the right number?
well, I think if we're going to ask any department to look at their budget, it's incumbent upon us to ask that of all departments again. But we could do that internally before we push it out to the department heads. Look at we have that information, look at those requests, and come with our own questions next week or recommendations, and have that conversation about where do we find approximately 300,000.
And I guess
And-
that's literally was my question. How do
Yeah.
we want to do that? Is that the way we do
I
it?
think we do that internally, this group here, and then if we sort of get to an impasse of where we think we should do it, then we can bring in department heads, and if there's budgets that are affected, we discuss it with those people before we just make requests for people to look at their budgets and make cuts.
I agree with Scott, if I'm understanding him right, that if we look at it among ourselves and we come up with a couple 100,000, can you tell me the definition of OPEB? I know what it is, but
Other post-employment benefits,
post-employment
So it's a-
benefits, okay.
actuaries exercise to get to what our future liability is for all of our retirees.
Okay, I thought that was it, just wanted to clarify it for anybody watching. And as far as I remember, we're way ahead of most of the rest of the state
That is true.
in getting that fully funded. So if we skip that for 100 grand, it'll have no effect on what we're doing, I don't think. The overlay, I've not discussed with the other assessors. I know that, and we have no way to know what the appellate tax board might come up with. I have no clue. Don't know till they tell us. But if that's reduced a little bit, if they come out and they say you have to pay, then we just have to find a way to pay, but we don't know yet what that's gonna be, so. So if we're going back to all the other departments and coming up with 50 or 100 grand, we've gotta find here and there. It's a lot better than trying to come up with 300 grand. I think we can come up ourselves with much, if not all of it, or at least a recommendation for it, I think.
Agreed.
And I agree certainly with Scott, we don't want to fund operating budget out of free cash.
Agreed. Dan, when you're saying with regard to OPEB, we're ahead of the rest of the state, how far ahead and where does that information or that determination come from? How do we know where?
I was gonna say, that came from our treasurer when she was looking at the numbers at last year's budget, saying that in comparison to other communities, we're quite a ways ahead of the projection for when we would be fully funded and self-sufficient to be able to fund all retirees out of that fund without continuing appropriations to it.
So I can tell you that as of December 31st, why did that get smaller when I did a new?
I looked over and that thing shrunk down to nothing.
Wow.
This whole
Make it
screen
bigger
went
and it
down to
would
about
seem
2 by
like
2 inch.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
reversed it.
Yeah, right. So no, I'm good, thank you. End market value total is $6.35 million in between benefits and insurance, the total after earnings at the end of the year last year. So that's pretty current. And then I will take me another second to dig up the statement from the actuary on like where funding would, fully funded would be. I know she provided that as well.
And I believe that was assuming we continued the $100,000 a year payments.
Yeah, she gave us breakdowns of it would take this many years or this many, and, there was no dire need to shorten that span of when we become
We're
fully
currently,
funded.
just to be clear with everybody, the goal is eventually to get to the point where the fund is self-funding all
Funding?
these benefits. We're currently funding the retirees out of the benefits budget. So
Right.
we're funding all active benefits for our retirees, and you're putting money into
and
OPEB.
putting money aside,
Correct.
yeah. Now, just for part of the discussion, Deb, you had brought up, the amount of funds that get turned back. And I think, Brian, we've talked about this many times. You typically look at not to exceed around 5%.
Correct.
I mean, that's a standard of, 5% of a budget. So, I mean, based on that, I would hate to say that we throw out the idea that it's customary to, not to exceed 5%, up to 5%, and you have to have some wiggle room with that. But then, with the understanding that 5% of the school's budget is about $193,000. So based on last year's budget, FY24. So just to keep that in mind, as the budget grows, that money that may get turned back every year will also grow. And to say that you want the return to the town to be under 1% or something, to be, under 35,000 or 36,000, it might be very difficult to get to. 5% is, when you say 300,000 or 200,000, it seems like a very large number. When it's 200,000 of 3.9 million, it's a little bit different.
The 100,000 was on like 3 or 3.5, not 4, because 4 is this year, right? It's
Yeah,
a
no,
much
I'm just-
smaller. I mean,
Right, no, I'm just
There
saying,
was significantly
there were some
less.
years that they were above the 5%, absolutely.
Yeah,
There was
yeah,
other
yeah,
years
for
that
sure,
they were
for
well
sure.
below the 5%. So
Yep.
it's just, I wanted to put it in context, so if people are looking at, year over year, keep that in mind of, compare it to what the overall budget is, and what's the percentage. And we sort of hold the other department heads to stay around the 5% or not to exceed the 5%, because that means that you're over budgeting your budget and you're not actually critiquing the line items to get there. And I've heard Mackenzie say that as chair, she's taking that task on to ensure that each line item is budgeted in an appropriate manner and sufficient and not over budgeted, not under budgeted, within that range, so.
So, in the interest of building a bridge of cooperation and just the attitude, I think, with the school committee administration over there and with all departments, I agree, we don't want people to have so much money left over that they're overfunding their budget. But the other side of the coin is, they're being good enough to return some money, not spend every single nickel that they have in their budget, which is good for the taxpayers, and it's a good cooperative way to go, I think.
I gotta say, I struggle with an increase this year after the size of the increase last year, and all the, we have a van, we have a plan to reduce our special ed transportation costs and all those things that are supposed to be realized. So an increase is actually even more because there's been some very targeted six-figure reductions in the operating costs. So
Don't get me wrong, I can't, at the budget presentation, I had questions about the overall budget and the line item. I was speaking to how much gets returned and the percentage.
Sure.
I agree with you that I'm not sure that the 3.954 that was presented is the number that needs to be approved to fully fund, based on all of the moving factors that have been changing over the last 6 months related to, out-of-district placement and transportation and all of those pieces, absolutely. New hires, lower rates when they're hired, higher rates when they're hired, all of those are moving targets that I don't know if that's an accurate number that would give a 5% return for next year, or if it would give a 15% return. I have no idea. Those questions will probably be asked tomorrow night at the school committee meeting when they do their budget hearing.
do we, just in a general sense, our free cash coming into this year, or from last year versus budget, was definitely significantly higher than 5%?
There were a few drivers to that. You had a reduction in what we anticipated the state charges to be, and a slight increase in those state receipts. So that wasn't anticipated and couldn't have been anticipated during the budget planning process, but that ended up being our experience. And then we had a number of grants on the school sides, some of them several years old, that needed to be closed out. So part of that was a reallocation of those older grants that needed to be closed out with the operating budget, and that resulted in a little bit more than what we normally would have seen in the school turning back money. So last year was a bit of an anomaly in that experience. It should not be that high this year.
Do you know how much of that was the flip-flop of revenue and state charges? You don't need that number tonight. Do you
I
have
had that
that?
back in October, but I can absolutely get that for
Yeah,
you.
just curious, because when
I
you
knew
look
this
at,
question would come up, and so
when you look
Debbie-
at around 750,000, it would be interesting to parse out how much of that was completely out of the town of Irving's control and was solely driven by the state and their cherry sheet for revenue and expenses. It paints a different picture if it was 25,000 as a delta or if it was 250,000 as a delta. That changes the picture a little bit.
I think my other concern is we're funding all of capital from free cash. And in FY '24, all the capacity for capital was taken out of the budget. So if free cash goes back to a more normal amount, then we're going to lose a big chunk of capacity for capital. I do also question, there were some pretty valid programs and hires, for lack of a better term, that were requested in FY '24 that we delayed because we didn't have the funding for them. And so is that something that we're revisiting in FY '25? I know we have several departments, whether it be the school or the assessors, that are actually asking for staff. But yet we have, an outstanding request for the PD, for example, for the cadet program. And so that is now a 2-year-old request. And so if we're considering making those types of additions, how are we doing that so it's a more thought out, I hate the word fair, but a more thought out process of
Townwide.
yeah, and what is a true need versus maybe a want or that kind of thing.
No, agreed. And I thought, if, I thought that could be sort of the part of the process that we would go through in this coming week of looking at what were those things that were actually requested of in FY25, but what were the things that were omitted? And are they things that we felt were important in 24 but absolutely could not fund them? Are they things that we feel just as important for FY25? Are we willing to embed them and see what the picture looks like at that point? That's the work I think we should do this next week and come back on Monday and have a better understanding about what is the net deficit or gain or whatever we end up with. It won't be a gain, but what is that true number? And then start playing around with what options have we come up with to mitigate that.
And I mean, we also had the department heads walk through the experiment, for lack of a better word, of finding revenue resources. And so, I don't want that to be for nothing and having them invested all that time in doing that. If it's, just something we're just going to kind of say, okay, no, we don't need to worry about it. We're not going to discuss. But at the same token, too, I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to keep funding some of the programs that we offer.
I mean, we can all just look through it and come back with our own individual pieces, but I mean, that's okay. It's just not necessarily focused or structured around a certain theme. And we're going to come to that next meeting and we got one more meeting to finalize it. So we don't have a lot of time to say, okay, now let's have department heads in, now let's think about it, now let's revisit again. We've got to be pretty timely about it. That's my only comment. I'm not saying that we can't do that. I'm just saying that's my only comment. I don't have an idea on a better way to approach it.
No,
I'm not
I was
saying
just going to
that.
say, taking the two and run them simultaneously. I mean, if we, inform all the department heads that we will be looking at the totality of all budget requests from every single department throughout the entire town, and just know that we're going to be doing the due diligence of trying to, A, look at the requests that were made, were they sufficient, are there things that were missed, and then B, when all of that is done, how do we fill the void? So we might think that something outweighs in importance, and I'll throw out the cadet program, and it's another, $100,000 between benefits and salary. And if somebody comes saying that's an important piece that I want in there, not only are you looking to offset that with $100,000 somewhere else in the current FY25 request, but we're also looking to, close that gap that we currently see. And so we can notify the department heads and ask them to do the same thing of their own budget simultaneously, and invite them all next week, and we can have that conversation, to expedite it. To your point, we only have 2 more meetings before timeline gets to the point where we don't have a choice. We have to have a balanced budget that we send for print.
Right.
Unless we're moving our annual town meeting to a different day, we have to.
Please no.
No, we need to do our work and get it done over the next 14 days. So, I mean, it's a great point, and I think maybe we do both. Maybe we do our work this week and we let them know, and we ask, come one, come all, be present, be ready.
Yeah. I'm fine with that. I mean, does that work for everybody? So we'll each go through and see what we see. Both 3 things, right? What might be potential things to reconsider whether we're going to fund in terms of It isn't even necessarily increases, it's just line items within any budget.
Correct, yeah.
Things that we might feel are potentially vital to fund that aren't. I mean, there's a cadet program, there's a firefighter, there's a highway operator, there's a lot of different ones that have been cut out in the last 12 plus months.
Correct.
And then what, if any, revenue generating options instead of cost that were proposed, or are there paths that we'd like to further go down? Some of those may happen anyway and not in time or aligned with reducing the budget, but can still be something that gets worked on and turned on sometime in the next 12 months
Right.
and then become a cost savings in the future fiscal year.
Brian?
So I wouldn't, just the idea that we don't have to solve those necessarily in 2 weeks, for them to still be
Just know,
something to
we just have to
pursue.
know about them.
Like identify them as where to put effort.
Do you have a clean copy of the totality of the budget? Not just the summary sheet, but all of the requests? Because, I mean, we have them, but they're in 5, 6, 7 different emails, and our budget packets come
Do you
as,
want them as PDFs, or do you want them as?
however, whatever works for you best.
What do you have? You have Excel?
He has an
I have an Excel workbook, but I have the PDFs that were generated from there. So I could do it either way.
I'd prefer Excel, but that's
I
me.
was gonna say an Excel workbook would allow us to tweak the numbers and
I can
see.
send you each a copy.
Highlight or call out or modify it. See where we get to numbers.
Yeah.
Everybody pick a font color. That's your color.
Jeez.
Put it on the
Yeah, that
sheet.
way we
We
have it
won't
all.
be sharing them, so that will not be an issue.
Correct. No, they'll all just be on our own local, so we can have
independent.
conversation. Oh, God, if we all had to share one document with all those track changes, forget that.
I go blue.
No.
Not a chance. Yeah.
Can I ask, Jake, maybe I misunderstood what you're talking about, and I'll use different words. When we talk about changing from an expense to a revenue, I think those words you used.
Yes.
In-
You want an
in-
example?
In my mind, it's up to people to, what they want was us to spend their money on. But if we come to a place where there's not enough money to go around, and people don't want an override, if that's the case, what do they want? Do they want to pay for trash to be picked up and it's not on the tax rate? Do they want to pay a sewer fee, whether it's the treatment plant or the lines in Erving Center or the stuff in Farley? Do they want to pay for that out of their pocket instead of on the tax rate, which would, that's a whole list of things that I happen to think we're way better off having it on the tax rate than paying for it out of our pocket. 'Cause out of your pocket, you pay 100 cents on a dollar. Homeowners do. But if it's on the tax rate, you're not paying 100 cents on a dollar. So none of us are advocating for those things, but I think listing them is a good thing to do, so that it's an option. Not good options, but they're options, I think.
Yes, I think you heard me and said
Okay.
what I'm thinking and saying. There's a difference I would say is, I think we've already heard the take on an override. It's pretty clear. And we've heard that they don't want to do that, but we can't maintain the same level of services. We already know that. We can't balance this budget, number one. Number two, we can't balance it and actually have any consistent guaranteed funding for capital. That's gone. We used to fund a couple $1 million a year almost in capital, like half and half, free cash and raise and appropriate. There's zero raise and appropriate in this budget. So the only part where I maybe differ is I think it's on us to identify what those things are and start moving certain things to paid services or discontinue them if we want to keep a balanced budget.
Well,
Because I don't think we can't have them all, right? Can't not have an override, continue to have everything paid for, and balance a budget. I don't see how we're going to do that sustainably for long term.
I agree with everything you said. I don't disagree. It's stated very well. However, at a town meeting, I think we've got 700 plus registered voters, I think, give or take a little. In a town meeting, we got 60 people. And almost 2/3 of them wanted something, and we lost by a few votes. And it may be that the other 600 people, when they find out this is going to cost you because you're going to pay a sewer fee or you're not going to have your trash picked up, might get the interest of the other 600 people to show up and vote. So to say that the people who were there spoke loud and clear, and most people would say override, it's like, would you like to have the override or maybe the plague? You know, that's not very popular in any event, but,
I'm
when
all
they,
set with
when
plagues for
when the
now.
majority of the people show up and find out it's gonna cost them $500-600, you know, instead of 150, they may change their mind. That's not
I may-
advocating for an override, it's their money, spend it how you want.
And I agree with you, but the question then becomes, how do we get those people to come? Because I know you've had conversations
Yep.
with taxpayers, with voters. I know I've had them. And the general response I get back is they feel it's pointless because there are other people who are more outspoken and they feel like they are talked over, and maybe this is a strong word to use, but I already opened the door. Some people feel like they get there and they are bullied.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you, but we've identified a problem, but where's the solution?
Well, if it hits people in the pocketbook, if it's clearly explained to them, for example, if it's on the tax rate, it's gonna cost you $100 or $200, whatever on your tax bill. If it's not on the tax rate, here's how much it costs to get trash picked up, here's how much the sewer fees are, it's not on the tax rate, it's gonna cost you $800. If it hits people in the pocketbook and it's explained to them in that way, if that's the case, I just picked those numbers out of the air, I haven't done research, but they're not far off. If people realize in one way it costs you 100 or two, the other way it might cost you 500 or 800, there might be incentive enough for them to show up. Maybe not. It's up to them. If they'd rather stay home and watch reruns or something instead of come to a town meeting, I can't change that.
But how do you propose we get that out to that population, or the whole population realistically, in a way that is meaningful and achieves that without actually implementing some of them?
Well,
Because, I mean, we can talk about them in these meetings all we want. How do we move the needle on that? And because maybe I'm missing some ideas and I welcome them, but unless we put it on a warrant in a way that costs more or less, depending on your perspective, it's less taxes, but it's more out of pocket, maybe. Because those are your choices. Unless we put that out there, I mean, I can send surveys all day, but I don't think that's going to move the needle, right?
Well, that's why I asked the question, so we have a list of, you know, here are the things you may have to pay for if we can't find a way to fix this within the budget. I think we can. I don't think we're there yet. By having to tell people, gee, we're not gonna pick up your trash or anything goes, I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a way to fix it. But with social media, whether it's people who are in favor of keeping it on the tax rate or people who are dead set against it, they think we're just spending too much money, can't change their mind no matter what you do. I was in a Lithuanian club in Athol one time and the Celtics were on. And people started screaming, shut that off, the select board's on. They wanted to watch what's going on. And people in social media, it's out there, they may not pick up a newspaper and see what happened here tonight. They may watch it on TV, but they may call up their friends and say, hey, let's get together and watch what's going on. It's our money. Pie in the sky, but I'd like for that to happen.
Another thing too, you brought up about the intimidation factor. There are ways to do a town meeting or do it with a secret vote, because I've seen other towns with a clicker, so people don't know how you're voting. You know, so there's an option that way, instead of going to the ballot box every single time.
On that note, not that it will likely be in place for annual town meeting, but the town clerk is exploring that option because towns around us have adopted that technology.
Mm-hmm.
That
Like
may be
electronic voting?
Yep.
That may be something you all want to consider. So he's researching what a capital request would look like for that. Doesn't help you for May, but.
But bullying is a horrible thing. It exists. You wish it didn't, but it does. And you'd like to see that you'd sit there beside your neighbor and they think this is great, you think it's horrible, but you can walk out and still be friends, not hate each other and try to destroy each other, which is something to work on too.
Should be that way. We may not all agree right here, and we'll do it on TV, but we still all get along and can go have a cup of coffee and have a conversation like adults and still be friendly, which I appreciate. Anyway, speaking for myself.
If there's coffee involved, I'll talk all night long.
Me too. I'm right there with you. Yeah, you made me think of something, but it was a fleeting thought. So, other comments, thoughts?
No, I think we have our marching orders to go through it all and come back ready to add, subtract, modify, amend, try and balance the best we can next week, and knowing that we only have one more week after that to get it all finalized.
My thought is, what is that number? So I think we generally have some ideas. We can get the revised tally out tomorrow,
Yep.
along with an Excel of the budget. What is the number we want to earmark for a capital deposit? Because it's driving the bottom line here, right? Is it 747? Is it 750? Is it 700? But what is
Right,
the number
that's-
that we're going for?
Right, because that drives what the,
Because I mean, for all of us to kind of be circling back to like, how are we trying to get there? What do we think we can find to get there? To balance that, if that's our goal, I guess, what is our goal we're working backward from? Is it to balance the budget with every penny of free cash used up and a deposit of how much into capital?
Well, it's not policy, but I think it's been practice in general to leave a few bucks of free cash available, because something's gonna hit the fan in a 12-month period. And I don't know if it's 20,000 or some small amount. If you need new tires on the backhoe or something, you don't have to go to a special town meeting and have a stabilization or something.
If I can just interrupt you, it's only going to be good from now till June 30.
Okay,
So this
Okay.
free cash, because then in October we'll certify next year's.
Right.
So just to shorten that timeline, whatever we don't spend between when we finalize this budget and June 30 is the only chance to use it anyway.
I got you.
I know we've had some June 30 STMs in the past.
we have. yeah.
We have not done much of those anymore.
yeah, good.
So we've gotten
That
away
line-
from needing to do last minute unless there was an emergency, fortunately. So, just sorry, not to.
I'm good with end of the year, put it in stabilization.
I mean, my feeling is capital always comes up, and I think people maybe aren't necessarily aware of what falls under the guidance of capital, and so they kind of think only big ticket things, but it can be something as small as tires for the backhoe. I don't want to sound greedy, but I also know that capital got wiped out last year, so I also know that, capital knows what our projects are coming up. The school roof is a major unknown, and that's something that, as that project gets going, we don't know what's out there for grants. We're hopeful that they are, might have some grant opportunities. But there's there's bridges, I'm hard pressed to say to cut it, to cut anything out of that number. I would say with the 747, 110. Maybe that's greedy, but I know what's coming. I know what the capital plan looks like, and I know what's coming down in the next couple of years for capital projects and such. And I know there's no way we're going to be able to do all of them, and we're going to have to get creative with whether we do finally do some borrowing or different funding strategies. I don't see a way, especially with this budget season, of how capital R&A gets put back in the budget. And so I think any time that there is free cash out there that capital can access, I think we need to grab it.
And just say, Deb, I wouldn't use the word greedy at all. I think you have a opinion based on good information that we're gonna need roofs and we're gonna need fire trucks and whatever the big things are. There are some smaller things too, but we know we're gonna need those things. Or the option is just run the wheels off everything till they fall off and let the buildings cave in, and people don't wanna do that. To not maintain something costs you a whole lot more than it does to maintain it. And so I don't think you're greedy at all. I think it's a wise decision. Take what you can, set it aside for those things that we all know we're gonna need. Hopefully, people agree.
I mean, when this first came about, what was it, 2017, 18, somewhere around there, when it was first created, I remember the idea was, you look at a 25-year plan, that's great, sometimes a 10-year plan and a 5-year plan, but you're looking at that and you're saying, we know we're going to expend $27 million over the next, 25 years, and we're anticipating that we need to set aside $1 million a year. I mean, it wasn't, those were real numbers that became a placeholder for R&A or free cash or some way to fund that. And then if we found ways to offset that throughout the year, you could modify that and maybe you would adjust the plan as it goes forward. But no, I think having, Deb's point is very, very valid. Having a line item that says capital stabilization, raise and appropriate, or stabilization free cash, either way, they funnel into that stabilization account to ensure that the overarching 25-year plan has a funding source so that we can do those projects. I see a lot of towns that are just reactive with how much do we have in free cash to spend, so that dictates what we can do for the coming year.
Right.
And that's a tough spot to
Right.
be in that I don't want to see us get to. So, you know, I agree. I think for this year, it happens to be free cash. It's a larger number. Next year, it may not be as large as Brian was indicating. This was an
Yeah.
anomaly, which means that we are going to have to look at R&A to offset. If that 25-year plan or 5-year plan or whatever algorithm you're using indicates that you need to set aside X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, that's a number that we need to know, because that's the placeholder that we have to put in this summary, whatever that is. I don't go to those meetings for capital, so I would put that back on capital and say, whatever that number is, that would be that placeholder in there. And the expenditures are the expenditures. That's what you meet on, you discuss. That's the 455, 445 that we talked about,
Yeah.
to spend, and that comes out of that fund. But that algorithm and that matrix of what we need to put in there is key for this summary sheet in order to put it in there and say, we need $1 million, or we need 750,000, or 500,000, whatever it is. I don't know. So this year, well, I would say, I agree. I think the full free cash makes sense.
And I know Deb was working on this and it wasn't quite done, and I was helping with it, and it isn't quite done. This was just like tallying, like what have we done for the last 5-6 years in capital? But I can tell you, even last year, with everything that we know, we reduced it. We spent 1.3 between R&A and free cash on capital.
Yeah, I was going
That
to say.
was the annual to today.
I think even,
And the year
10
before was
years ago.
1.2, and it was $1 million plus the year before. So I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking, that's just what
Yes.
we did. We know in a lot of times we didn't use up all the free cash, and we didn't do what we're
Right.
talking about today, which was to consume it all.
No. So I threw out $1 million.
I mean, I
thinking
agree
that's
with
a
you, at
ballpark.
750 isn't maybe enough,
Right.
but it's, right now, at least 300 more than balanced
Yeah.
or something, so
It's just difficult when I know that advocating to keep that funding in for capital means cuts elsewhere. So there's no good sides to that coin. That's all.
Well, I think that's the other half of the coin too that Dan was talking about, which is if we don't have the money to do that, then we won't be providing some of the services, so we won't need to fund them because we won't have the equipment, we won't have the buildings, it will be self-fulfilling. It'll go away because we can't do them because we don't have the things to do them with because we weren't able to maintain the equipment and the buildings so there's no longer that building. So yeah, it doesn't have a cost anymore because, well, we don't have that function, right? Or we don't have that service. So that's even longer term, and hopefully we won't get there. And maybe this year we don't need to change our funding models on everything to get balanced, but I don't think it's far off. Not if we're losing potentially $500,000 to $1 million of our traditional funding model for capital. If we're, $500,000 to $1 million less every year towards that, that's going to show up pretty quick in our assets and
3 to
our
5
fleet.
years.
Right. By the time stuff starts showing the difference, yeah.
And
Anyhow.
What
Yep.
we're learning too, just to enhance that point, is these buildings that we provide the services fall into disrepair. There's a cost of demolishing them to keep them safe.
Oh, that's a great lead-in. So I think it sounded like 747. I like whole numbers, so I'm going to put 750 on my worksheet.
Yep.
Is a number to try to get us to work towards a zero. Okay. So that's that one. The rest of the capital recommendations, some of them are grant funded, and that's a project over time, so it's not a solve it now. for senior housing. But then
Yep.
the IP
Yes.
mill recommendation, which that capital kind of came to, was recommending putting it on as an exclusion and recommending, if that fails, to recommend it to be auctioned. And being, maybe I'm ad-libbing, so tell me if I am, being very clear in the language of the article that that's the plan.
Yep.
You pass this, then we demo it, and this is the cost. You don't, then we're gonna auction it because we can't keep carrying the liability.
Right.
Both the insurer wants all kinds of upgrades we can't do, the roof and God knows what now to keep it insured, and just the overall liability of it.
So you weren't here last meeting.
No, I wasn't, so.
I will just say I agree. I'll keep it very short and sweet. And very clear on the article information about these are the steps. This is the cost. This is what it'll get you. If it fails, this is the alternative. And
And the path's written, and we're
we'll follow whatever
it's
lead the
choose-
town tells
they
us they want
choose
us to do.
their adventure.
Ditto.
And I just want to add, part of the reason, and I'm going to speak for myself, I feel pretty strongly about this because we will probably end up forfeiting the $600,000 grant. Because last time Mariah had come to talk to Capital about it, she did not believe that she would be able to get them to keep that grant for us if they weren't seeing any movement from us. And that's a big grant to get forfeited by not moving forward with this project. And because of the demands from the insurance company, something's got to happen with that building. I jokingly say it all the time, I'm surprised a body hasn't been found in there yet. Something is going to happen. We need to move and do something with that building. It cannot just sit there for another 20 years. And so auctioning was the only other way that we could think of to maybe get it out of the town's hands, and then at least it's a private property owner who has to deal with whatever that space becomes.
And we do, just for clarity, have the RFP out.
Yes.
And
we're
are
still-
going to hopefully see some results of that. And if those
That would be amazing.
are fruitful, then this path wouldn't go. But,
Correct.
But
Yep.
just to be clear. But I think we need to be planning towards it.
Yeah.
When is that due?
April 2nd is,
Yeah, so a
April
couple
4th.
weeks.
April 4th is the date we gave.
So I think, and maybe this came up before, because now it's ringing a bell, that we were going to continue moving forward on whatever path.
Yeah.
We can always pass over it at the town meeting if we have a viable option
If we
to
feel we're
pursue.
close to,
Yeah. Which we'll have time to
closing on
vet
a-
between
yeah.
then and,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So, annual town meeting? It is its own article, it is special language, it's an override, a debt exclusion, right, it was a recommendation. And I think as we talked through that with the citizens who came to one of those information sessions, we talked about debt exclusion. And it seemed like the 3-year was the most, 3-year, 1 year, but given the tax changes with the evaluation
Spreading it
changes
out
and
over
everything, I
3
think
year
the
made
3-year
sense.
is the
Yeah.
better choice.
Yep.
So, and then on the ballot as well?
It would have to be on the
yeah,
town election,
on
the
the-
town ballot.
Yeah, town election.
Yep. One clarification though, if it fails and we go down the route of auctioning, we are not, we always had selective demolition as an option. There was proposals out there, so if it means that we wanted to utilize that 600,000 and make the property a little more attractive for people coming to an auction to try and buy it, we could attempt to utilize that 600,000 and selectively demolish portions of, 'cause knowing that it's all going to prior to an auction. You know,
Wasn't there a stipulation on though in the grant that if we did something like that, we had to pay it back? Or am I totally just,
It's if we auction it for more than the grant amount, then if we make a profit,
If
Correct.
there's a profit realized on the valuation of the property.
which means all of
Okay.
the money we've put in, subtracted from whatever we get paid, is there
Okay.
any value left?
And-
And then if so, then that's
Then
payback
it pay
against the
back.
600.
I think my only concern with that would be, and I don't know the building numbers. So I believe when we talked selective demolition before, we talked about the first structure that had really been kind of vandalized where the computers and the monitors were. And then it would leave a hole in building, the
Two.
building is building number 2, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do
And
that because we wouldn't have money to shore up building
that's
two.
would be my
It would be
concern.
more of building, I think, 5.
Building 5's the worst.
Building 5's the worst, and you could do that as a freestanding and find
Okay.
areas to tear that down and demolish that within the 600,000.
Okay.
It wouldn't be in totality. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just, it
Yeah.
won't cover it. But there was portions of it that were really bad and unsafe, and
Oh, yeah.
if we could do that and it makes it a little bit more attractive for 1 or 2 other people that wanted to
Sure.
bid on it, if it went down that route, that would make sense to me.
Right.
So, rather than giving away
So I'm
600,000.
drafting an article
Absolutely.
for a 3-year debt exclusion.
Yep, 3-year debt
And you
exclusion.
want me to tell the town clerk to prepare for its inclusion on the ballot?
Yep.
Okay.
What happens to the money that's generated from the auction? You sell it for X amount of dollars, what does that money go back in the general fund?
Well,
Free cash?
yes,
Free cash?
so it was taken for tax title, so the treasurer would auction it for tax. I don't know that you would garner
I don't think
as
we
much
garner a
as-
profit, but
Right.
No, I'm
But
just saying,
but that's what
whatever,
it would be used
It would
for.
mitigate the loss that
It
we've
would
seen
go
over the
towards that.
last
Yep.
number of years.
but some miraculous amount, first covers our expenses, second covers taxes, back taxes and all of that. Third pays back the grant if we used it. And then I believe by the latest findings, any excess would be potentially the prior owners, not the towns.
There's a court case.
So any kind of
The-
value above what it cost us is not ours, because it's not
There's
our
a
equity.
federal court case and the mass laws don't completely align, and I know they're working on that on the state level.
Right. But we have a lot of maybe
We'd
intangible
have to s-
costs that we do get to cover.
Yeah, I was
Or
gonna say,
like
we'd have to
tax
cover
that
a
didn't
lot.
get paid and things like
Right.
that, that all counts as, we can recoup first, so. The likelihood there's anything left,
Right.
Slim to none.
yeah. Dollar, costs us 5,000 to auction it and we'll be 499.9
In the
negative.
hole. Just to get rid of it.
So, okay, so we'll move forward on that path.
Yep.
Both of those. That's that one.
Yep.
STM, ATM, yeah. ATM articles.
So we're leaving the budget?
Yeah,
I mean, I
so.
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like the spreadsheet, we'll plug, and the tally, plug in 700 for a capital deposit,
Okay,
and we'll have at it for next week.
okay. I'll send that to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, right now, your draft, we have the multi-year, the 10-year with Montague for wastewater. That's in negotiations, that'd be an authorization for us to renew that for another 10.
Correct.
Second one, authorization to sign a 10-year with the Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
We don't have it.
Oh. It's only.
Oh, that wasn't in their packet?
No.
Okay, well, I'll talk about them, and then if you have questions,
Can you
please.
at least email it to us real quick?
Let me email it to you.
The second one, it says Montague, but it's actually FCR HRA. That would be who the 10 year is with, right? Technically, it's the County Regional Housing Authority.
This is why we need a screen.
Acquisition of property, this is cleanup, if I'm not mistaken, of the parcel at the police department.
Yeah.
Its actual bounds, because there's some unknown, unclear slivers in there somewhere, where this will just clean that up.
It's the ravine on the left side between.
It's the ravine that nobody wanted in
That
there.
nobody wanted, and
Not
it
mine.
actually is ours, or should have been.
Not my ravine.
Right. So this will just make clear boundaries of that parcel.
The deed era goes back to the 1930s. So,
And every deed subsequently.
If anybody's got anyone who remembers what that was supposed to be. No.
that should be in your email.
I was thinking of Dan. No. I'm just teasing. Usually you have a history and tell me things about how properties were. I look to people who know more than I do. The other things out there, we talk about the town code, right? We're hoping to have that. Are we talking about doing
So
that
that's the
separately? That's
question.
still an open question.
The vendor would prefer having a little more time to get to June, but it's a question for you all. It's your warrant, so.
Okay. Well, if we're gonna have an override and a debt exclusion and all this stuff, it's starting to feel pretty big all
I
by
was gonna
itself.
say,
so
I would
I'm
prefer to
leaning that way too.
If we weren't going to move the debt exclusion to a special, I would like to move this one, especially if the vendor's asking for a little bit more time.
Yeah, I think so.
Did get a response. You all talked about the town code last week.
Yeah.
There was a numbering concern I had in several of the articles. It would impact its expendability, and I do have a quote on that for you guys.
Yeah, it was a couple thousand, right? Or no, it was
600 and-
600 and something.
Yeah,
You sent an
660, I
email.
mean, I think that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's it.
There's your
Yeah.
answer.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the town
I
clerk
mean,
and I
it's
will
a few
fix that.
dollars for something it's gonna hopefully long outlast
Yeah.
us.
That's the goal. Okay, so we will fix that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes,
Um,
please, thank you.
We've got all the things that are the other list at the bottom of the tally sheet. Those are all articles that will blow out generally. Funding for OPEB, funding for highway, those are all separate
Right.
articles.
For your next meeting, I can start drafting out what the ATM warrant will look like and put placeholders in places that you haven't made decisions.
Okay. We talked, there was a conversation about possibly expanding the cap on the senior work-off program abatement limit. We have it at 750. Currently, we could go up to 1,500, and then it sounds like there is a bill out there that may raise that limit to 2,000, but that's not the case yet. Do we want to consider putting it on to raise it to 1,500?
Yeah, I don't mind. I was just wondering, were you able to get any info on how widely utilized it is?
In the town of Irving, right now, we have no
Nobody's.
current applicants using it to date. We do have people who are now interested since the changes that folks experienced in the fall. The last time it was used was a few years ago. I believe we have one resident who took advantage of the program for maybe 2 years.
Okay.
So it
But
was
there's
not
been
heavily used.
renewed interest since the tax
Correct.
rate changes
Yeah.
of late.
And as we went through that process to look at making sure it was up to date, we realized that we've fallen behind where several other communities have gone with it as it's evolved. So
I'd be in favor of putting it on there.
I would as well.
Okay.
let's draft an article.
Yes,
please.
Can I ask a question? When you
No.
did it, when you did it in 2016, you all had a slightly different approach than what you've done in recent years. So you simply had a vote to adopt the provisions of the MGL, which is like the other local adoptions you've done, and there was another one to set it at the 750. Do you just want this to be like the local adoption vote, or do you want this to be structured as a bylaw vote, so it becomes part of your town code?
I was just thinking, so if things where we're adopting something, that's stuff that we are building into town code, right?
So
In many cases?
what the town clerk and I have done is created a table, like an appendice in the back, that has a place for all of your special acts with the legislature and then your local adoptions of MGLs. So that the town meeting and the statutory references are all captured, because there's really no other summary for that. But they're not actual bylaws, so they don't belong in the earlier chapters and sections.
Okay.
So the question would be, does this belong in that back appendice? Or does this belong up front in a chapter and section part of your bylaws? I think you can make an argument either way.
I don't know the pro of having them as bylaws if they're local adoption options, and we've just exercised the options. I mean, the statute language exists already. If we create it as a bylaw, then the adopted statute changes, we have to then update our bylaw, right?
Or you can adopt it as amended from time to time, and then it can,
As a bylaw,
as a bylaw.
referencing the statute. So what's the pro of having it as a bylaw versus an adopted local option?
I think the question is where somebody would most likely to find it. I think putting into your town code in general greatly increases the chance that somebody will find this. Part of what you adopted in 2016 had been lost over time. So doing that research was helpful. It will be easier to do going forward. Having it as part of the bylaws that folks are used to searching and navigating through, I think is helpful, but if it's only going to be one sentence, that doesn't really require a bylaw to accomplish.
from doing work on the planning board, I would have it be a bylaw that referenced MGL. And that way, if the dollar amount changed with MGL and you're referencing MGL, then your dollar amount just automatically changes. It's a lot more clear and concise. And as a resident who was going to try and look for something like this, they can just, go and, especially if it's searchable online, they can just literally type in the word, senior, and there it is. And it's just clear and concise and.
The local option will be the same way, though, just be in a different
Yeah,
section.
table in the back.
But it would be we've adopted this and we've set the limit at that, right?
Yep.
Whereas the bylaw would say we've adopted this and set the limit at that.
May give you the option to put more provisions if you felt that was necessary. I can take a look at what some other towns have done. See if there's a sway one way or the other, and then you all can make a decision. But it sounds like you do want to address this at the annual?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if it was going to just be, if it was going to be something that's local adoption or bylaw that we're going to rewrite in the town code in a month and a half after,
Right.
when we adopt the town code, then I would just put it in the town code because we're going to disband all the old stuff, adopt a whole new code. If it's in the new code and we've adopted it, then it's just done in one sweep. And I don't feel like this is so significant that that change is a big deal, but
So
if you guys feel differently. We've already adopted
that makes
local
sense.
option.
Let me look it up and draft some language for the three of you to review.
Okay.
And then you can decide if you want to keep it as part of the ATM, if it's just a quick update, or if it's going to look more like a bylaw and you want to hold it to the STM.
Okay.
You can do that.
Going to make
Just
me
for
want to
my
go
own-
back and understand out
Yeah.
of all the things that we have, how many have we optioned and how many have we written as bylaws?
I can send you that chart.
And if we have ones we've adopted as bylaws, but they're literally the same language and we didn't add any qualifiers, like, can we be consistent? I guess would just,
As long as you promise that we're not delaying this project. This is 5 years.
No, this is,
I can promise that if that's what it meant, we can reevaluate. But
Yeah.
I just, from a consistency
Yes.
standpoint, you just said like, how do we find it? And I'm going, so you're telling me some of them might be bylaws, some might not be, and some we
Yes.
might have adopted something differently
Yes.
than what it says. How
The
is
nice
that
part
easy?
Once the town code is adopted, the reality is the structure is almost the most important portion of this. Because then we can build whatever changes you want to see in the future off that. If we keep changing the draft,
well, yeah.
Yeah.
the back and forth process between the vendors slowing us down with legal review to get it ready for town meeting. So we can't get the structure in place. You
Yeah.
adopted some bylaws last year that said to become part of the town code, but we couldn't actually name the structure because it wasn't ready yet.
Yeah, I'm not looking to revisit structure.
Right.
I'm just saying, is there consistency already? And that
Right.
may infer the decision. If there's not consistency and it's all over, then maybe that's a project
Okay,
down the road.
Just for my own clarity, abatements come out of overlay, is that correct?
correct.
Okay, just making sure, because that's where this is all funded from,
The abatements get processed through the assessor's overlay.
through the overlay. Okay.
Okay. And then care drive layout. I don't know if we'd be ready for the layout, but I don't think we're ready around lease and long-term agreement and all that in a week and a half or 2 weeks to put language together.
Okay.
Personally. I think there's still some things to go. If we're going to have an STM, we know anyway for town code, then I'm not super concerned about deferring care drive layout and or land lease agreements.
Well, my question would be, what does that do to the timeline? Because the current applicant, RDI, would need some sort of assurance that there's movement on it before they can do other pieces.
We need, with the current timeline, we need to start applying for some of those competitive grant rounds, whether it's the towns applying for our portion or RDI's applying for theirs, in the June timeframe.
So we need to have this solidified prior to that so we can apply.
So May annual.
Well, if it's June applications and a June special, I don't know if it matters.
Yeah.
I'm not saying if she does or doesn't. I'm just,
We meet with them this week,
Okay.
the senior housing committee.
I
so
know
can
we had
pose
a
that
meeting
question.
with them and there were some questions that we're waiting on the answers for.
Let me follow up with them
But
and get you all.
part of it was about this and pros and cons of the sale versus lease, to be able to have that.
Right, and I know there were some questions
Conversation.
with council that we had posed, and I need to follow up because I don't know that she's gotten back to us yet on that. So I'll follow up with
Okay.
that.
I mean, if we have some of those answers, then maybe it's a conversation for Monday or the Monday after while we're all
Okay.
here. but I'm not sure we have enough yet. I'm not feeling like I know enough today that I'm ready to think we're gonna have language on something to put
Right.
together in 2 meetings. That's
Well,
my thought. Maybe I'm not.
So the authorization is to enter into, it doesn't tell you that you have to have all that language. It's the town authorizing us to continue in that process.
These two would just be authorizations.
But this says sale or lease, and then it says long-term lease. But if we wanted to do a sale, then that's different. It's not, they're not all ors, right?
No, we've done it through sale or lease before.
on the
It's the town
land.
telling us that we have the option.
It's authorized.
But that's
in the
what I'm
three of you.
asking. We can do both of them as sale or lease, then I don't know, then maybe, yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
then we have
If
more
it's
time.
not defining it, yeah.
It's not
yeah,
defining
yeah,
it, and
okay.
then we have time to
Right.
actually work on what that looks like.
So I can draft it, and then you can hold the language for whatever warrant you think is more appropriate.
I think that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah,
If we
if
had it
it's,
drafted.
if it's that simple and
Yeah.
it gives that flat latitude, then maybe I'm not concerned.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it was more the
Well,
actual
yeah,
pieces
yeah.
of it. If it's not that, then I don't care. I don't have a strong opinion either way.
I believe I have a model that we've used in the past, so.
Okay. And we have more opioid money to move?
No, because you adopted.
That adoption gave us it this time finally, so now it's just steadily
now,
happening?
As the payments come in, the treasurer is
Okay.
authorized to move 100% of the proceeds into the fund.
Okay.
Good.
We do need to add an article to spend it. And
Yes.
so I need to have a follow-up with the public safety departments and the Board of Health.
I was going to say, I believe the Board of Health Chair was working on coordinating with them.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's what I recall last, was asking them for their recommendations on what to do.
I'd like to get it to the point, because we will have it for the next 15 years, I'd like to structure it similarly to the way we approach the community television access. So it becomes an article on the annual town meeting warrant. It's got its own fund assigned to it, and we make the plans for the expenditure each year.
Okay.
Anything else for the ATM? Articles, we'll have a capital article, obviously. We won't have IP, obviously, and we won't have care drive ones on there. And we'll have, what, one for wastewater, one for all the others.
Right.
Those are all gonna
Recurring.
fund from capital. Then we'll have a deposit article that's separate,
Right.
and the current year versus
Right.
FY '25.
Yeah, you'll have
Keep
one-
that
you'll have
clarity.
one
We have
for
one for the current year,
165.
one for next year, one from wastewater, and one for deposit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I do like that methodology. I think that makes sense. We earmark a certain amount every year that goes in, and the expenditure is the expenditure that gets approved, and that's what ends up on the warrant.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. I think that's it for ATM at the moment. I think that's it for joint, because we got IP mill in there during the capital/ATM,
We
so.
did.
Is there anything else for the joint meeting?
Motion to adjourn the joint meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning the joint meeting with capital finance and continuing the select board meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
I think we only had one other piece.
I think we only have the town code, right?
No, sorry, just two.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
The
We have the
extension of the,
FCA, RHRA, yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll do that one first, because that's maybe the quicker one. Review of the proposed agreement extension with the Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
Hopefully the memo made sense. And there should have been copies of the past extension and then the original agreement in your packets.
That was the addendum one, right?
Addendum 1, correct,
Yeah.
So this is to extend it from March to June,
of this
and
fiscal.
Of this
then
fiscal year.
we're asking for the 10-year in the ATM, which would allow us to then
Right.
finalize something for July 1 for a
Correct.
10-year.
And I did have an initial meeting with the administration at the Housing Authority. There are, the structure of your current agreement from 2013 is sort of an older template that was being used in the state. And obviously the Housing Authority has had rounds with some of our peers in the county. And so there's other versions of contracts, and a few years after that last contract was formed, there was some evolutions to the model that they think would be beneficial for the program and the way it's being administered that they would like to propose in this renewal. So instead of it just basically being a carbon copy of what you had 10 years ago, they would like to discuss some of those structural changes. And so it would be helpful if there was a member of the board that could work with me on that, with the Housing Authority, go over what they're proposing for changes for the three of you to consider. And then we can get that back to you all for review as a formal board in the meantime. It sounded appealing, but obviously that's for the three of you to decide.
I have no concerns with negotiating a new 10-year.
Okay.
I don't know.
Do you need a motion for that addendum?
We do need, if you're open to it, addendum 2 issued, and an authorization to have the chairman sign it. To just get this to June 30.
Hang on 1 second before you make one, if you're planning to. I think I have
Sure,
a
go.
question.
You had a question on it?
I think so.
On the addendum, or?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. So
The addendum is
we
page 75.
extended it to March because it's in effect today, right?
You did a 12-month period from the date of the last extension. We approved it on February 27th, but it was dated February 6th. So it's we're currently out.
Okay, so it was expiring March 23. In February, we extended 1 year to February 24.
Correct.
So it is technically expired at the moment. So it would be, okay.
As of a couple weeks
So I
ago.
back-
That
backdated
was
the
the piece I
addendum.
missed, was it's not extended to March, but we are extending from February. So,
I was
which
picking
is
up the date
correct
after.
because we
I'm sorry.
weren't. No, that's fine. I was thinking it was March. Why are we extending February 7th, not March something? I'm
But
good.
actually, now that you say that, I grabbed February 7th, but I put 2023, and that should read 2024.
Yep.
Yes.
February 7th, 2024 to June 30, 2024.
I'm good.
You good with it?
I am good with it.
So then I will make a motion that we authorize or approve addendum number 2 between the town of Erving and the Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And it's an authorization to amend the agreement for participation in the Housing Rehabilitation Revolving Loan Program with a term ending June 30th, 2024, and authorizing the chair of the select board, Jake Smith, to sign.
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The second piece is you need somebody to work with you.
If you all would be willing.
Is that new one significantly different than the old one?
I don't think it's significantly different in terms of the negotiation and what the actual agreement will look like. There's some
Yeah.
programmatic changes that would be different.
Okay.
It'd be helpful, I think, to have a practical conversation about what that looks like.
Got it. I'm hearing everybody really excited about that idea.
I don't mind. I'll volunteer to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'm working with you on, Brian, is the RDI. If we ever get to that point to
Right.
work on that, I'm working on that one, but that's a little slow going right now. And this will be faster pace
Correct.
because it needs to get done pretty quickly.
And they already have some proposed language ready
Yeah.
to work on with us. So.
So I don't mind spending, a few afternoons going over some options and
Okay.
working that out.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean,
problem.
you don't have any.
Unless
not
you're
gonna
chomping at the
challenge
bit
him
to
for
do it.
are you?
No, I'm still gearing up for the negotiations with Montague over
Right.
over
That's about to
that
begin too.
agreement, which we're still trying to set
Get a first
dates
date.
and get together.
For the new
And-
10-year.
And I'm guessing, once we get into that, we're going to get into it.
You're going to be busier than I will with this one.
And the regional EMS is lulled a little, but I have a feeling there'll be some some stuff. I gotta see what that's looking like,
Yeah.
but that's gonna ramp back up here pretty soon.
All right.
I
So we
think-
all got our little,
I think we all got some, that's
Yeah,
for sure. So
yeah.
thank you for taking that one.
no problem.
Okay. Then review of draft town code of bylaws.
So I didn't send a new version
No.
because the 400-page version you had the last time is
Darn. We don't have new numbering?
not yet.
Kidding.
I will give her the go-ahead to work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see, for $663, we
No,
want
that
to make that
makes-
as best a structure as we can.
Yeah.
And it will look just the way we have it in zoning. So
You
it will function.
you
the same.
stole my words. We need a document that's gonna outlive all of us. So $600 is,
That'll
That's
do
usually
it.
what you say, so I did
Yeah.
steal that one from you.
thank you.
Popped right in my head, and I'm like looking at you going, yeah.
Shut the new
Outlive us
guy
all.
up. Okay,
No, not at all.
Yeah.
it's good. I'm just kidding.
Anything on the code that you all have had thoughts on? I know for you, it's probably first reads.
Yeah, no,
For us,
it's
it's stuff
first.
that we took in parcels and
Yeah.
asked for things, but
The only thing I want to do is go through it one more time before it makes it onto a warrant to make sure that we're satisfied with the final version with the new numbering and any, like this conversation we just had this evening about which way are we going, bylaw, code,
local adoption stuff.
local
yeah.
adoption. So,
So I would propose, let's not bring it back for at least a week or two. Let's get
Give some time.
the annual and the budget.
yeah, this is going to move to a
Adopted,
special. We've already
And
determined
then
that.
they're gonna need a little time, so if we have that by, if that's 3 or 4 weeks out and that's ready, if it's not, we'll probably put it on anyway, just to touch base,
Can I
if we've seen anything.
just get confirmation on some of the directive I was giving in-house, but I wanted to check with the three of you. We talked about it last week, but obviously you weren't here. I've told them that my recommendation at this point is to reject any zoning proposals for changes. None of them were of substance, and the zoning was just adopted, and we're not going back through that process right now.
We
But
wouldn't
we
even
can
make we wouldn't even
forward.
make an FY24 special if we had to do that.
No,
Yeah, no.
but we'll forward
so we
that
would
feedback to the planning board, and they can consider it.
So zoning would come through as is, and then those can be things that they deal with if they want to when they're doing other changes.
Exactly.
Yep,
When you
I
adopted
like it.
zoning at
Yeah.
town meeting, we put in the language that it would be adopted as chapter 230 of the town code, so we took care of that in June of last year.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, these aren't grammatical and that type of thing, which we've already adopted the option to just change.
Right.
No, these
So
are
if they have any
substantive.
substance, then no,
Right.
I'm with you.
They're substantive in the fact that they should go to a public hearing, but they're not substantive in the, like, earth shattering, we're not changing dimensions.
It's fine.
One example was the use of the term building inspector versus building commissioner. They mean the same thing statutorily, but. they
But you
are
have to go through a full
inconsistent.
hearing and you have to do
Right.
all of that duly.
It
yeah.
doesn't make sense to do that now.
You and I talked about that one specifically, and I think I had said, can we, in a glossary,
Actually,
put building commissioner, see building inspector. Building inspector, also known as building commissioner, or whatever, and
Maybe
define
we'll
it
like that.
outside of the zoning that's adopted that has to go to a meeting, just to provide that consistent clarity, and then whether we ever change the language or not.
And if they change
It
it,
can be referenced clearly that it's the same.
and if they change the language, they can
Yeah.
pull it out
update
of
the
that
glossary at the
glossary.
same time.
yeah, let me ask them if we can.
Because if
take
that's
that
if
approach.
that's just a glossary of the town code and not a zoning
Right.
glossary, and I don't know, maybe that makes it hard to find. But if there's something like that already in there, we can.
But
add
either
it.
way, they can modify it the next time they bring it back
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
zoning changes.
So what will be presented for the June special will not include zoning, because
Right.
it's already been addressed. It will be the other chapters. There are a few other smaller bylaw changes that you made in the last year and a half that were adopted as part of the town code, but they're like 2-section bylaws. The Cable Advisory Committee, the cemetery commissioners, there was a couple small ones. And so do you want those to also be held out as they're already done? Or would you rather just have them because they're smaller and they're pretty routine, just part of what the presentation is?
I would like the presentation to include everything that
But
can
zoning.
without having to do zoning.
Got it, okay.
That's
I just
my
wanna be clear.
preference.
With a little zoning has already been adopted and will drop in here,
we'll
but
have
we
it,
aren't
yep.
putting it in here to adopt tonight.
Correct.
Perfect. And then you all discuss with me the idea of having information sessions like we did for zoning, doing the same thing for the rest of this, and I've had that conversation with the clerk. So we are going to pick 2 days, either later in May, early June, that we wanted to know what your preference was on annual versus special. Pick some dates to recommend that we'll host those information sessions, so that any community member who would like to go through the red line copy and have a conversation about what we're doing and why it's being presented, would have the opportunity to come and do it. Of course, there'll be a copy at Town Hall. People can come in and ask questions and flip through it. We'll post it on the website. So there will be a multitude of ways to access it if folks are interested. That plan work?
Yep.
Works for me.
Works.
Okay, I'll give them the feedback.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I have one ask of you to think about putting it on a future agenda. If we are moving forward with senior housing, the idea of hiring a consultant to shepherd us through that process, because that's a huge endeavor, and time on task will eat up, especially seeing how we don't have, even if we hired a town planner,
Yeah, but
they'd
not the
have
only
to
thing. They
spend
would have
6
to be,
months getting up to date on
and we
what
need them
that.
to do more than one thing.
Correct. So it's not on the agenda tonight, so just something to think about. If you want to have that conversation, I'd be willing to have that conversation at a future meeting.
Would you be prepared to, or would you need a little time to think about like when and for how long that we might consider that?
I can get back to you with that.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be next, Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not to put it on next
doesn't have to be
meeting,
the
but
next-
you know,
no.
in
It-
the
it
next
can be-
month or
It
so.
can
like-
maybe be in April,
Okay.
like maybe the first week of April, second week of April, something like that.
Okay.
where-
All right.
Just something to think about.
We'll put it on there just to start a discussion. and-
Yeah, I think that's a heavy enough lift that it'll burden the office known as Brian Smith if he has to do that on his own.
The office, the planner now, yeah.
Yeah. So just something to think about.
Yep, agreed. That's another position that was in the list that didn't happen. There's another one in the office. To support this stuff. Okay, no, I'm fine with that. I'll put it on, and maybe if there's options, potentially depending on how we're funding, that a grant can help offset that cost as well, or carry that cost.
Right.
With what we're exploring for grants, that we are gonna start before we have anyone to do that.
Yeah.
That'd be good to know.
Well,
too.
and also we have, every 2 weeks, we are earmarking money that would have been spent on salary, that is not being spent on salary,
As in kind to offset some of it.
to offset. So if we were to, shift that from the current town planner salary line item, because that won't need to be expended in FY,
Consulting services.
to consultant services. So it's not
Okay.
an increase to the budget at all. It would actually just be utilizing it in a different way.
Okay. Good.
Thank
Okay.
you all.
I am fine with that, yeah. We'll get it on early April then.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
That's all I got.
This time.
Next Monday, same place, same time?
Yep.
If the creek don't rise.
Any more than it already has? With that, I'll make a motion to adjourn at 9:09.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good evening, everyone.